Hey y'all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. And we are doing something a little bit different today. Avid viewers of the channel will probably notice one major difference with this video compared to my usual ones, which is that I'm wearing a new shirt. Um, this is, probably can't make it out, but this is actually a shirt I got at a Fleet Foxes concert, which may or may not be hinting at something to come in the future. Maybe. It is quite comfortable though. Um, the other major change is that we have a guest. We're probably not going to make a habit of doing a ton of like guest videos in general, just because I don't know if that's the format that we'll be going with in the long term. But I thought this particular subject warranted someone else speaking on it. So I have Tom with me. A lot of people who view the channel currently will probably know of Tom's YouTube channel, William Schmilliams. If you have not checked it out, what are you doing? You need to go ahead and do it. There's a lot of cool kind of discography ranking videos there. He's doing an Albums of the Year series with some guests, some collaborators going through kind of the 20th century and one day into the 21st century, talking about the best albums of each year. And it's great. It's good fun, good discussions, good people. Check it out. It's great stuff.
Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Free PR. You can send that check to me over Venmo or whatever payment method you prefer. All right.
Carrier pigeon.
Carrier pigeon. There we go. So we're talking about the Beatles. Now, I know what you're thinking. The world does not need another Beatles video. You're correct. No one
Definitely correct.
no one out here needs to defend the Beatles. I think everything that can be said about them has been said pretty much at this point. But if you've been keeping up with the news, there's been a lot of things happening in the world of the Beatles lately. This has been a very busy time. And really the kind of headlining to that is the release of what they are saying, at least, is the last proper Beatles single. We're going to talk about that. Well, it will have its due, but I figured this would be an interesting opportunity to discuss something that I do think is a little bit under discussed comparatively in the YouTube world, which is the singles of the Beatles. I think just in general in the internet, we have a very sort of album brain focus on any sort of music discourse. And so when we talk about discographies of artists, it is very centered around the idea of an album. And that's fine. And that works well for a lot of artists in general. But especially when you get into like earlier artists in kind of the early days of the album, it's incomplete. I'll use Elvis Presley as an example. Like Elvis is not someone who you could have a complete discussion of his career without discussing his singles, because there were so many non-album singles. And that's the case with the Beatles. Their singles were very much separate things from their albums. Some of them overlap. They also get credit for being like, oh, they released singles that weren't on albums and they were trailblazers in that regard. Not really. That was actually very common back in that day. But regardless, they were very separate, and it was a very rare thing for them to have that much success, for any artist to have that much success, both with the single side of things and with the albums, and for both of them to be kind of critically regarded in an equal way, I suppose. So that's what we're here to discuss today. We are going to blaze through the British canon singles. Sorry to the Americans out there, but they're not canon. I cannot keep the American singles straight for the life of me. Before we jump into the actual first single, just one like discussion question I have for you. We don't need to talk about how we got into the Beatles, because I think we both are massive fans and, it's to be expected. We both love them. I am curious though, like, what was your first Beatles related release that you listened to? Did you get in through the studio albums, or did you get in through like either a singles compilation or like just like, I mean, probably radio play on some level, but like, what was the first like release that you listened to?
I mean, yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this. This is going to be an extremely long podcast style video. So strap in, get your favorite drink of choice, snack of choice, whatever. You may need to do it in multiple sittings, but that just means more views for Alex. So great. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I am not entirely sure if I'm being totally honest, because it's really hard to remember, even though, I was actually relatively late getting into music in general and getting into the Beatles. But I would say probably the first one I heard will have been not sort of willingly, and it would have been the compilation one, which when I was in year six in school, which I believe is, I would have been like 10 ish, 11, last year of primary school in the UK school system. Um, we had to do a project which was related to the 60s, and we had to talk about sort of movies, music, culture in general of the 60s. And our teacher would play one in class while we were just sort of like preparing our projects. And obviously I knew some of them already, but uh yeah, there was a lot of tracks, especially like She Loves You, I think, which I think for a lot of kids is like a Beatles song that they can find very accessible. um but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was one that she'd play all the time. But yeah, bit hazy that side of it. And then I did well. I'll tell you how I got through the Beatles into the Beatles, even though you didn't ask. But I got into the Beatles through a friend who's basically like showed me a few songs, and then I'm pretty sure I would have then listened to Abbey Road first, maybe. I don't know. I don't quote me on that. I mean, it was probably one of Abbey Road, Rubber Soul, or Sergeant Pepper, and then I kind of explored from there. So yeah, very good question. I wish I had a more concrete answer. What about you?
Oh, that's a great answer. Mine was actually, and it's top. My answer is topical as well. It was the Blue album, the Red and the Blue album. My
Yes.
parents, yeah, my parents owned the Blue album on CD, and I remember there was this little like theater production thing that I was a part of when I was like 8, and we were going to sing Across the Universe as like one of the songs. There was like a whole theme about songs that mentioned change and things like that. So nothing's going to change my world. It fits. Um, so my parents played the Blue album in the car. I got really into it. I got the Red album as a Christmas present that year. We were in the process of moving at that point. So I have like very vivid memories of playing those things as I was like packing and unpacking boxes and things. And then my road after that was really strange because the next thing I listened to was the anthology albums. Um, because they were the other ones that my parents owned at the time. They didn't have any proper studio records. So, in a way, I listened to the singles because that's really what the Red and Blue albums mostly were singles and some album tracks. And then the anthology stuff. Um, I have no idea what my first proper studio album was, but I kind of think it might have even been the White Album. So a very unorthodox path into getting into the Beatles. But I think definitely like listening to those compilations rather than being like, okay, first thing I ever heard was like Sergeant Pepper's. I think that gives me a very different framework from someone who would have started with specifically the studio albums.
Yeah, and I guess we don't want to talk too much before we actually get into the songs, but because there's so much to get through. But it kind of brings up an interesting question of like, if you are a young person who knows Beatles hits and wants to get into the Beatles, what is the most likely first album you're going to check out? It's probably Abbey Road because of the album cover and because of Here Comes the Sun, which is probably the most played song now. Is that
I
fair
think
to
so.
say?
I think so.
Yeah. And yeah, so but then you got like Rate Your Music and stuff, which would probably lead people towards like Revolver, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question to ponder, like the next generation of Beatles fans.
right. Well, and they're coming from two different places. You have the people who are coming from streaming who, yeah, are probably going to get into Abbey Road. And then you'll have the people who are either coming in it through the Rate Your Music avenue or through maybe like watching video essays about Sergeant Pepper or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be the next 10 to 20 years or so. It's going to be really interesting to see how people get into the band, but they will get into the band. Like they're, the Beatles are going to be one of those cultural mainstays, like your Beethovens of the world, where they're going to be household names for as long as we're alive and probably for as long as our grandchildren are going to be alive as well. Um, okay, well, I'm going to start by talking about a single that kind of counts as a single. I'm going to talk about My Bonnie. Um, so this is, if you're not familiar, was a song that was recorded by a guy named Tony Sheridan in Hamburg, Germany. The Beatles were Sheridan's backing band at the time. This was, I believe, their second stint in Hamburg. Um, so it kind of counts as a Beatles single, kind of doesn't, but it is historically significant for being the single that introduced Brian Epstein to the Beatles. Um, kind of, yeah, interesting story there. It's hard to say how much value this thing really has. I think Tony Sheridan, to his credit, great guitarist, but in a lot of ways was very much aping Elvis, like pretty much everybody else was, and you really hear that. Certainly on the A side, you really hear it on the B side, which is a cover of When the Saints Go Marching In. But the energy of the band is fantastic. I really love the acapella intro to My Bonnie, and then kind of all the screaming and shouting that are going on. It's probably the best high quality replication of what they were doing in the clubs in Germany at that time. I know you have like the Star Club tapes, which were these really shitty like bootleg recordings from late 1962. They sound awful, but they're more quote unquote authentic. But this is like high quality, sounds really good. You know, it's the rock and roll era of the Beatles. So it has value in that standpoint, but this is not a starting point for any Beatles fans. So
No, I think I agree. I've only heard it once, which was specifically for this video. It's fine. It's a product of its time, and I think we're going to be saying this a lot about these early songs. Is that songwriting wise? This is going to sound sacrilegious. I don't think they're really doing too much in these early years, like 62, 63, that is setting them apart. What's setting them apart is their sort of band chemistry, this unified feel. And like you said, the energy that they provide is just infectious and unlike anything at that time. You know, it's probably comparable to punk music springing up in the late 70s. In terms of like compared to what was around at the time, it's so different to everything else in terms of like style and like just energy. So yeah, that is My Bonnie. And now we're going to get into Beatles proper, I believe, with Love Me Do and P.S. I Love You. So the A side kind of, like, I do really like Love Me Do. I think it succeeds through its quaint simplicity. I think that's kind of why it's so great. The harmonica part on it, and it's got this sort of like country-ish shuffle, which is actually quite different to a lot of what they would do afterwards. There's a few songs on Please Please Me that are quite a bit country-ish, which is very interesting. And the melody is like part bluesy, part like bubblegum poppy, which is really cool. It feels like they're sort of pulling from all these different influences that they've got. And yeah, like it doesn't feel like a mix of influences at the same time. It feels like it's just Love Me Do. It's a pop song and it's a great pop song. You know, it doesn't feel like it's trying to do country, blues, pop, all these kind of things. It fits into the pop landscape so perfectly. It's infectious. It's sweet. It's Love Me Do. I mean, what else can I say about it? It's a great song.
yeah. To your point, very briefly about punkiness and how you hear that in some of the energy. I know I just dissed the Star Club tapes for being like really bad sound quality, but especially there's several moments on those recordings, especially the version of Long Tall Sally that is on there. That is proto punk. Like you hear how fast they're playing, which is because I mean they're on all these fucking pills and stuff like that, which is why they're doing it. And McCartney, like you can make out the rasp in his vocals. Like I'm not gonna come here and say that the Beatles invented punk music. That's kind of a ridiculous claim to make, but you definitely hear the overlap in like, especially some of the other proto punk groups that are going to come later in the 60s too. It's really cool.
And I think as well, like I'm again, it's hard to talk about the Beatles because you've got to like put an asterisk next to everything you say.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that there are a lot of people who hate the Beatles. Okay. What I'm saying is there are younger people around my age who think that they're too cool for the Beatles and that like, you know, whatever, it's the Beatles. Like, I know they're good, but I just don't care. And like you're talking about these early Beatles recordings, I've heard a lot of them, and listening to them and then listening to like the live recordings from Husker Du and the Minutemen and stuff, and like that similar like tinny audio quality. And I don't know, there is like a cool rawness. Even you want to talk about like the Velvet Underground as well. Um, there is something so cool about those recordings in that, they're not the most listenable things in the world, like if we're
Mhm.
being honest, but there is that element of like these guys were real musicians and they were just putting it all out there on stage. And that's like, they were just recording it any way they could. And when the Minutemen and Husker do it, it's like, people are like, oh, this is so cool, like this edgy like alternative band. I love those bands as well. I'm just like,
Mhm.
it's an interesting thing to think about how like in 20 years the way people sort of appreciate music changed, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. Um, so it's kind of funny because now I'm going to come in and basically say that I'm too cool for a particular Beatles song. Um, I've never been crazy about Love Me Do. Um, I think to me, compared to even just the stuff that is going to come immediately after it, to me, this is like a tier or two below everything else as far as like actual songwriting goes. Um, it is so simplistic. I mean, I think this, I want to say this was written in like the late 50s. I mean, this was a years old song at this point when they recorded it. And you can tell that this is like an early attempt at songwriting from them. Um, I like it. There's a lot of, I get Buddy Holly influence in this with kind of the word choices and how they emphasize like the word do. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm associating with Peggy Sue and that whole thing. Peggy Sue. I don't know. But it's pleasant. And the singing is good. Key point, the single version of Love Me Do is different from the album version of Love Me Do. I know a lot of people know that, but just to be clear, single version is the one that has Ringo on drums. The album version is the one that has Andy White with Ringo playing tambourine on it. Um, there's not all that much difference. I do think the album version is a bit cleaner. Paul sounds really nervous, I think, on the single version. And he sounds really shaky on the original recording from June with Pete Best on drums. That's kind of a mess, but we won't talk about Pete Best. Um, and the B side of this one, P.S. I Love You. I really like that song. It's really pleasant. Some nice, like, it's a nice melody, nice, like, harmony singing and like the choruses and stuff like that. I dig it.
We're flipped. I'm not a big fan of PS I Love You.
Dang.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the way McCartney sings that you woo 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 woo. It's just like
Yeah.
it really irritates me. And I think for me, early Beatles, like these first few singles we're going to get to, I think until the fifth one, we're going to be a bit like I'm going to be saying the A side is great, the B side.
Mhm.
So yeah, but it's not terrible. I just never ever think I'm going to put "P.S. I Love You" on, whereas I do with "Love Me Do." So that's an interesting. We're already disagreeing. So
Yeah. Oh, I think it's fair. And I can see how P.S. I Love You is very like rooted in its time and in like some of the cheesier pop music conventions of that period. So I get that. Okay. Please, Please Me. The next single released in January of 63. Um, Ask Me Why on the B side. Yeah. That's the one where I'm not super crazy about it, although it has grown on me. Um, Ask Me Why has. But we'll talk about Please Please Me. To me, this song is a quantum leap from what they were doing on Let Me Do. I think this is like how they structure the song, just as far as the energy that's in there. I know originally it was like a ballad, or it's supposed to be a slower ballad. And I think George Martin was the one who had the idea to pick up the tempo and do a couple of other songwriting techniques. Shout out to George Martin. He gave them a lot of songwriting tips in these early singles that absolutely elevated them. For however much you think he gets a little bit too much credit in the later stuff, I think he doesn't get enough credit on the early stuff for some of the ideas that he brings. Um, but yeah, like the way the harmonies like work around and Paul kind of doing that like one steady high harmony note in the verses while John's descending, and then the pre-chorus with the come ons. I mean, it's so well done. um there's kind of not really much of a bridge in this song, but they get really good at writing bridges really quickly, and you really start seeing that with the next couple of singles. Um, yeah, to me, this thing has an energy that is not there at all on Love Me Do. Um, and, that kind of story that's said about how George Martin, like, you know, came down on the intercom and said that, boys, you've just made your first number one hit single, which, you know, people have verified is a true thing that actually happened. I can hear it. To me, when I compare this to like the other Mersey beat of the time, the other like pop rock singles of the time, this is the one that to me sounds almost nothing like what was coming out. Um, and if there were similarities, um, this elevates, I think, kind of the other works in this genre that was coming out at that period of time. So I love Please Please Me. And it's going to be a love fest pretty much from here on out for me as far as the A sides go, with maybe one or two exceptions. But yeah, Please Please Me is fantastic.
Yeah, the Beatles might be my favorite band, and I'm still going to be the one being more negative here in this video, it seems, but that's fine. Um, I can acknowledge that some of their songs don't work as well as there are others for me. I think Please Please Me is not one of those songs that doesn't work as well. It's a really good song. I slightly prefer Love Me Do, maybe just because of the warm fuzziness of it. Whereas Please Please Me is like nice pop, but it's not like, it doesn't give me that same sort of like warm feeling. It's like an intangible thing, you know? But I do agree with you that in a lot of ways, this is a step up from that first single. The drum performance here is fantastic. Really good drums on this song. Um, McCartney and Lennon sound really good together, and I like the sort of surf rock style guitar on it, which is, quite different. Yeah, Please Please Me, really like it. Ask Me Why, similar to PS I Love You. I think Please Please Me is a very uneven album, and songs like Ask Me Why and PS I Love You drag it down because it does feel quite trite and a product of its time rather than of these all-time great songwriters. It's perfectly fine, but I don't think it really sets itself apart from anything else that was going on at this time. And I was trying to think that way while listening to these, like, how many of these songs sound like they would just blow everything out, everything from that time period out of the water. And it was actually not less than I thought. Like most of the songs do, but there were more than I thought that don't. And I think Ask Me Why is one of those.
So now let's talk about From Me to You, um, released April 63. Uh, I really like this song. However, I did have a realization, which we'll come to when we talk about a later single, that makes me like it a little bit less. Um, is it as good as Please Please Me? Probably not. I It's hard to say. There's a lot of energy in this one, and I really like the hook. I really like the hook, and I like the bridge to it as well. And I think some people find how they like sing the guitar line at the beginning, the da 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 da. Some people find that a little bit annoying. I like it. I think that's an interesting little twist that they do. Um, it's also the only, I believe this was the only single that they released that got any sort of like airplay in the US before they broke big. I think this appeared in like the Billboard Hot 100, like bubbling under section. So it didn't chart, but it came close. Um, but yeah, I think this comes dangerously close to being a generic early Beatles single. But again, generic early Beatles is still pretty damn good. Um, I'm going to be somewhat negative. I don't like the B side very much here at all. In fact, I might say "Thank You, Girl" is the weakest B side they ever did. Um, yeah, no, that I think it's the weakest B side they ever put out. There's not much there. I think it suffers from that same immaturity that Love Me Do has, but there's not as much charm there at all. It's a little bit like that song has an intro with like the little like very nasal ow ow, which is just, I don't know, of its time, not in a great way. Not bad though, but yeah, it's A side is strong though. I'm probably underrating it a little bit, but it's a good song.
Um, we've arrived at my least favorite single of the bunch, which, as you can imagine, just means we're going to be going up from here. And I don't think either of these songs are bad at all. I just think of all these, like, just the least comeback sort of factor for me. Um, yeah, from me to you, I like how unpolished the vocal harmonies are. Like compared to what else they were doing around the time. I'm not sure that was a purposeful choice, but it works pretty well for the song. Um, I think it's a bit forgettable in the context of early Beatles singles. Like you talked about, like "She Loves You," "Please Please Me," "Love Me Do." We're gonna get to "I Want to Hold Your Hand." This just is not at that level for me. Um, and yeah, "Thank You Girl." I probably like it a little bit more than you, but also like not a song that I'm going to be rushing to hear ever. So I think we can move on swiftly from this one.
Yeah, I agree. Um, She Loves You, backed with I'll Get You from August of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
63. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, yes. This is fantastic. This is a fantastic song. Um, Very interesting. If people haven't already heard the stereo mixes of She Loves You as well as the original Love Me Do single that appear on the new version of the Red album, check it out. It's the first time these songs have ever been quote unquote properly mixed in stereo because of the isolation techniques that Peter Jackson and his team used, the same stuff they did for Now and Then. And it's, I'm not saying it makes me appreciate the song even more, but it still really showcases the power. This is a powerful song. Um, it just like right from that opening little drum fill, everything just kind of like it hits you upside the head and it does not let off for 2 minutes. It is fast paced. The vocals are so strong. Harmonies like all over the damn place. They really, this really pops up in the new mix. Like the amount of just natural like echo and reverb that they add on the vocals here just makes it sound like a live performance. And I think, yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about She Loves You. I think this is a song. If you were to poll people as far as like the early Beatles songs and like which one holds up the best, I think a lot of people would put this one at the top or very near the top. I certainly would. And the crazy part is that it wasn't initially supposed to be the A side. The B side, I'll Get You, was written as the A side initially, and She Loves You was their attempt at writing a B side. And I like I'll Get You. I don't mind the song. It's pleasant, but yeah, you could tell like after they recorded She Loves You, they were like, okay, shit, yeah, we cannot put this on the B side. There's absolutely no way in hell. But yeah, I'll Get You is fine, but I mean, it's all about the A side. It's all about the A side. And to be fair, I think there's also like I like talking about the B sides of these singles because I think they do get a little bit forgotten about, and there are some fantastic ones coming up here. Um, but I think it is fair to like. I also don't want to underrate a single based off of like a B side being completely throwaway. Like the point of there was it's not really the point of a B side to get radio airplay. It's there to fill up material. And if it's great, then that's just an added bonus. So, just throwing that piece of conversational material out there. But She Loves You's fan fucking tastic.
Yeah, well said on the last part regarding B sides, and you basically covered everything I wanted to say about "I'll Get You," so I'm not even going to talk about it. I agree with everything you said. "She Loves You." I really like it. I It's one of the few Beatles songs where I've just heard it too much. And it's just so familiar that I just can't. And that is probably because it was one of the first ones that I remember being aware of and singing along to and enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy going back to it whenever I do, but again, I don't really seek it out. And it's never like a, oh God, She Loves You. It's like, I'm happy to revisit it. It's just, it's not one of my go-tos. That said, from a pure songwriting standpoint, this is easily the best song they've done up to this point. It's so immediate and just grabs you. Again, so much has been said about it just starting with the chorus, and that sort of structural choice is just genius. And actually, this time around, my biggest sort of takeaway was George Harrison's guitar, because it is like it's like weirdly, I don't want to say sinister, but it gives it like an edge that it just otherwise it would just be like any other bubblegum pop, but because it's like so relentlessly fast and George is doing these like really sort of like creepy, sort of edgy guitar parts inside it. I mean, it's not like the guitar parts on Creep, right? Where it's like dun, dun, dun. It's like a lot more subtle than that, where it's like it just feels like there's an anxiety here. And I don't know, maybe I'm looking into it too much, since they probably just like rushed to throw this together as a B-side. But the idea of like she loves you, there's like this idea of like anxiety. Is there a sense of jealousy there? It just gives it a different dynamic, which you don't really get in any of the songs before this, which I can really appreciate. If you don't mind, I'm going to go straight into the next one because this is our first Dynamite doubleheader, in my opinion. I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy are both fantastic. The first of many of their like god tier double helpings. Well, there's going to be so many where I'm just like, yeah, both these songs are great. And this is the first time, not only where I think the B side keeps up, but I think actually I prefer This Boy over I Want to Hold Your Hand. But anyway, I Want to Hold Your Hand, just like She Loves You, Waste No Time getting into it. That opening riff is so immediate. And of their sort of really early, like super bubblegummy big hits, this has been my preferred choice. The vocal harmonies are superb. It's so infectious. It's like every time it comes on, I've just got to sing along. It's like this urge that just comes over me. Um, and you know, I listened to the German version when I visited Germany, and that was a funny thing to do. um, um, but yeah, it's fantastic. And then This Boy comes, which is like a complete change of mood. It's like this doo-wop style song. And for my money, the best song they had put out up to this point, which I know I just said that about She Loves You, but you know, the bar is going to be higher and higher almost every time we talk about a song at this point. Um, their vocals rarely sound better, and I love that sort of like chugging guitar throughout it. It's just really nice. And I love John's vocals when he sings the cry, and then oh my god, it's just so cool. And aside from Twist and Shout, it's like night and day the best vocal performance in terms of like emotion up to this point. Um, and I like George's like sort of rinky dink guitar lick at the end in the outro as well. Really cool. It's just so well constructed. And we're going to talk about like perfect arrangements, perfectly constructed and produced songs. And I think This Boy is one of them, but that's going to be more of a factor later on. And this is, to me, a kind of precursor of what comes later in terms of that just hard hitting emotion, brilliant performances all around, and just a mature sound that is also really catchy and really listenable. So I cannot say enough good things about This Boy. I love it.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna add to that chorus because I agree. This is a pretty much a pitch perfect single, A side and B side to me. Um, to build off of what you said on This Boy, it's all about those harmonies. It's all about those harmonies. They were always good at it. Even the stuff like Love Me Do that I haven't been as positive on, like it's still like on point harmony singing, two-part harmony. And when they get into three-part stuff, you know, I mean, this is like, you know, this is up there with some of the better doo-wop singles of that period of time. I'm not going to say it's up with the very, very best, but like it's really strong. It's really well done. Yeah, Lennon anchoring the bottom, Harrison in the middle, McCartney up top. It's just so gorgeous. The Lennon's vocals on the middle eight, if you will, are fantastic. I agree. I think it's some of his best singing, like of the early period, probably of all time, frankly. And yeah, it's so interesting. Like I could talk for hours on end about the Beatles harmony singing just in general because there's so much to pick around there. But this is just so, yeah, I don't know. It's a perfect pop song. It's a perfect pop song. This Boy is, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. So one thing that I realized when I was re-listening to these singles is that I Want to Hold Your Hand essentially builds off of the exact same song structure of From Me to You, but does it way better. Because From Me to You, you know, kind of comes in with the intro. It has this like, you know, verse chorus structure, and then especially with its bridges, it has two different bridges in it. One where the vocals are in unison, and one where the vocals are in harmony. I Want to Hold Your Hand is the exact same thing. I Want to Hold Your Hand is a much better song. Um, it's you know it's I mean that you could talk about the humorous angle of it, the whole Bob Dylan mishearing the lyrics as I get high, et cetera, which is still very funny. I still laugh whenever I read it. But yeah, I think the guitars on this one are really on point. Again, I think verse, chorus, and bridge here each have like very distinct melodies that are just like earworms that get into your brain. And that's something they're so good at. You know, they, I think the whole band as melody writers are really strong. I think in particular, McCartney, I've said, I think he's one of the greatest melody writers we've ever had. But it's so, yeah, it's so tight again. And it's so dynamic again with like how the bridges like get quiet. I keep talking about the fucking bridges, but they get quiet and then they build up at the end and then just explode back into the verse. And again, the harmonies between Lennon and McCartney are just on point. I don't know if I like it more than She Loves You, because She Loves You, that is just about like pure energy there. And that's what I adore about it. But this is an incredibly well crafted song. And not surprising at all that this is the one that finally broke them through in the US. Can't Buy Me Love, backed with You Can't Do That from March of 64. Can't Buy Me Love is a great song. And it's interesting when I reflect on it that to me, Can't Buy Me Love, out of like all the like early Beatles songs in general, is like, it still has a lot of cultural capital to this day. At least I'm only speaking from my experience in like the US, but like Can't Buy Me Love is a song that I still think like most kids, even if they don't know much of anything else about the Beatles, have heard that song. Which you can't say as much, at least from my experience, for a lot of their other singles. But I think it speaks to just like how, for one thing, I think how covered this song has become. Like, I mean, for context, I'm in the middle of doing a deep dive on Ella Fitzgerald right now. And Ella Fitzgerald was the first person, I believe, who covered Can't Buy Me Love, and she recorded her version 2 weeks after the song came out. I mean, this thing was popular like right from the get-go. And it's so easy to see why. And it's so easy to see why she covered it, because this works as a jazz song. Like, even if they're not taking a jazz approach to recording it, you could tell, yes, this could be easily adapted into like an up-tempo swing number and could be done really well. Paul's double track vocals are fantastic. Love the guitar solo in the middle. And, it's one of the more straight ahead, like early Beatles songs, early Beatles singles, I suppose. It's not as sophisticated songwriting wise as I think like I Want to Hold Your Hand is, for example, but it's energetic in the right way. And I think the instrumental track is fantastic. You Can't Do That as the B-side. I don't know. I love A Hard Day's Night as an album. To me, I think it is actually very close to being like a 10 out of 10 album for me. I think it is remarkably good. But You Can't Do That is maybe some of that is like the John Lennon context, I suppose, when it comes to the lyrical content. But it's not one of my favorites from the record. And I actually think that he does the kind of country adjacent rock thing a little better on the song I Call Your Name off of the Long Tall Sally EP, which he recorded at around the same time. It's a good song, but I'm not super crazy about it. But again, killer A-side, bro.
Yeah, so for me, Can't Buy Me Love, as much as I think it's great, it's probably in the bottom half of the A-sides that we're going to talk about quite comfortably. I think it's really good. I think it's actually one of the earliest songs that feels sort of distinctly McCartney, if that makes sense. While there's like a sense of like rebuttal with the song, it feels still like jovial and playful and like, again, just melodically and lyrically feels very Paul McCartney. It's definitely one of the highs on Hard Day's Night. I agree with you. It's a great album. Um, it's a very much like a mood lifter album for me because there's something about the songs on it that are just so like defiant of everything. It's like each song just doesn't care about anything else that's happening. That song is all that matters right now, and I think that's a really cool quality. Um, I think like songwriting in terms of like musical structure and stuff like that. Yeah, not their most complex. I do think lyrically though, again, we talked about the idea of like she loves you and like can't buy me love. It's like a bit, baby steps, right? But it's a bit more of a like a negative spin on that sort of like boy meets girl falls in love thing, which is kind of what they were dealing with on their first album. Um, yeah, first two albums really. But yeah, so I think "Can't Buy Me Love" is great. I agree with you. It's kind of like one of their most lasting songs, weirdly, because last time I checked, I don't think the Spotify plays reflects that really. And in fact, I remember the first time I listened to "A Hard Day's Night," I remember this song came on and I assumed it was a cover because I've always thought this was a Motown song. I don't know why. I just assumed it was a Motown song. I'd heard it a lot. I was like, oh, the Beatles covered this because they've done a lot of other like covers of major like R&B songs in their early, especially on With the Beatles. Um, so that was kind of like an interesting thing. Like, oh, this is an original Beatles song. This is very strange, and yeah, it's definitely influenced by sort of like the Four Tops and those kind of groups, which is really cool. You can't do that. Um, I'm with you. It's probably like bottom five on Hard Day's Night for me. Um, I do like it. I think my favorite thing about it is the riff and the guitar tone. It almost feels like proto CCR in a way. Like that sort of like guitar sound and vibe is very like, for lack of a better term, swampy. And I think what's kind of tainted this song is that a lot of people are like, oh my God, Harry Nilsson's cover of it is so good. And I love Harry Nilsson, and I think his cover is lame as shit. Uh, so that's kind of like soured it because I've heard so many like Nilsson fans tell me how great his cover of You Can't Do That is. And there's a bit of disdain creeping in for the song. The original version is great though. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go straight into the next single as well, because I have a cool link point here because I made a note of the percussion being really cool on this song, which I hadn't really picked up on before. And I think Hard Day's Night in general, the percussion is a lot more varied than on their previous albums, which is a really cool choice. There's like cowbell and bongo, I think, on this song. Or it might be box drum, not sure. Some kind of like smack a box and it makes a noise percussion instrument, which then leads us into A Hard Day's Night, which is just a relentless song, despite not featuring a traditional drum kit. Like all the percussion is done on this sort of like, again, is it a box drum? I don't know. It's my ears are not that attuned to types of percussion, and I think when have you got a point or?
Oh yeah, just it's bongos. It's just straight up bongos.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I thought so. But yeah, somehow the song I think gets even better when I hyper focus on the percussion because it has this like barraging momentum, and then when you're like hyper focusing on that with like everything else kind of just happening around it, you kind of realize what the center of the song is, and that is that sort of like driving rhythm. Of course, the opening chord is fantastic. That opening chord feels like it signifies the dawning of a new era. And there's a lot of dawns of new eras with the Beatles. So we're going to be talking about that again later. And I love the collaborative feel of it with Paul coming in with the bridge. I love the sharp acoustic guitar strums. George's like off kilter 12-string guitar solo, which is really cool and strange. And then that jangly outro is so cool. And the only complaint I can have with this song is that they should have made track 2 on the album built around that riff. How cool would that have been? That it just like goes into this riff and it just like carries on. The album just carries on with a new song, but instead it just fades out after like 10 seconds. I'm like, that riff was so good. Like the Birds could have like written a number 1 single with that riff. And then things we said today, I actually like less than You Can't Do That. It's one of my very least favorites on A Hard Day's Night, which I realize is a hot take because a lot of people seem to really like it. I think it's a bit one note, not very dynamic, especially on, as I was mentioning about the album, an album that is so dynamic and so like in your face. This song just feels a bit apologetic, in my opinion. So that's my take on that single.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, what is there to say about the title track here? I To me, this is emblematic of two things that the Beatles know how to do well, which is going to seem repetitive because the Beatles knew how to do a lot of things very well. But they knew how to start a song, which we've already talked about with like the intro to She Loves You and stuff like that. And they know how to end a song. Um, there is a very significant lack of, like, for the most part, this song being an exception, there's a significant lack of fade outs in their discography. They know how to conclusively resolve a song. But in a case like this, I think that guitar outro works in this case as a fade out because it is kind of like it leaves you on kind of an uncertain note. I do agree. I think it'd be really cool if they had actually done a sort of like transition into another song, but maybe that was a little bit too highbrow, high art, even for them back then. Um, yeah, great guitars. The percussion section is immense here. I do think there is a drum kit in here, but it is augmented so much by the bongos and the cowbell. Like the bongos are the first thing that I pick up every single time when I listen to this thing, and it adds so much. Yeah, lots of little like percussive tricks in some of these like Beatles songs, like using stuff like suitcases even to like keep time. It's just so interesting. Um, Love how like Lennon takes the verses, Lennon and McCartney both do the chorus and then or the refrain or what have you, and then McCartney does that solo bridge section, which is unbelievable. Guitar sound is fantastic. That opening chord, which has caused so much debate over the years as far as who exactly is playing what. It's so interesting how there's like a whole section of Beatles scholarly research dedicated to the one chord in A Hard Day's Night. Like it's mind blowing. But again, effective opening technique. So well done. Um, Love the song. Things we said today, I really like it, but also like McCartney is my favorite Beatle. I am very partial to when he gets a little bit kind of sappy and pleasant, I suppose. I do think the bridge sections is where this song actually has a little bit of a dynamic build. I think that does kind of contrast in a nice way. But yeah, but definitely the verses and choruses are one note. So I totally see what you're saying. Um, but yeah, it's another strong, another strong single from a great album and a great film for anyone who hasn't seen it. Fantastic movie.
I've still never seen the movie. I've never seen Help either, so I'm really behind on my Beatles lore in terms of the movies.
I haven't seen Help in a long time. I remember that one being like Help tries to have a plot, I think is the problem with that one. A Hard Day's Night doesn't really have one, but that's the charm. Like it is just a bunch of comedic riffing and a really funny script. And for the most part, pretty well acted by the Beatles. Paul's kind of awkward sometimes. Paul's never been a very good actor, but John especially like is in his element in that film. So highly recommend it. Okay. Next one we have up, I Feel Fine, non-album single, backed with She's a Woman. So again, kind of the album single versus non-album single. Like there's probably, I think it's about like half and half when you do the math. Half of their singles appear on albums, half don't. I Feel Fine is a song that everyone knows is significant because of the intro, because of the use of feedback. And and that part is really effective, really cool, and we can talk about the influence for days. As far as the actual song goes, it feels like a step backwards a little bit in terms of like subject matter, but I think it is really well executed. Like this feels like the Beatles saying, "Hey, we're going to do the type of song that we would have written in like early '63, but we're a better band now. We're tighter." The 3-part harmonies and the choruses again are fantastic. The drum part is like holy shit levels of good. Like people don't really talk about it, but Ringo's drumming on this song is fantastic. Um, it's yeah, it's a solid song. Again, like the bridge bits on there. Guitar solo is great. The B side, She's a Woman. I adore this song. It's because I think this is like McCartney delving into that R&B bluesy influence, which to me, when he does that, when he like allows himself to just go fully head first into that style of music, I think it works so well. That's why I love like his Little Richard cover, Long Tall Sally. Later on, he'll do it on like Abbey Road with Oh Darling and stuff like that. And I love the crunchy guitar chords like at the very beginning. They're so, and also the just the intro in general, like the guitar chords make you think that they're like the downbeat or whatever, and then the drums and bass and everything else kicks in, and it's like, oh wait, no, that's the offbeat. Okay, it's like it's a little metrical shift, a little metrical trick that they'll do a couple of times, I think, in their career, and I think that's always really cool when like bands do it. Just a little oral oral trickery. Um, and great vocal from McCartney. Obviously, I think it's kind of funny that like McCartney loves this song because he's brought it back to like his live performances periodically, including this year. I have not heard McCartney trying to do She's a Woman this year. I don't know that I want to. I feel like that's going to be a little bit difficult to listen to. But yeah, it works very well for what it is. I think it's a great B side track. I think it is the definition of a strong B side that would not have worked as an A side, but in this, it fits its niche well, I suppose, is what I have to say.
I have much less to say about these two than most of the songs on this list, which people will be glad about because we're nearly an hour in, I think, and we're not even halfway through the list. So I feel fine. Great A side. Again, the opening feedback is iconic. You basically completely stole my thunder, which is fine because you're a very smart guy, and I can accept being one upped to make my points before me. No,
Appreciate it.
it's I literally wrote it's got the early Beatles simplistic songwriting coupled with a darker sound and arrangement and more effective playing. So there you go. Basically what you said. She's a Woman is a bit hokey for me. And definitely one of my least favorite songs in this entire like bunch of songs that we're going to talk about. I find the guitar stabs really monotonous and like mind numbing, just like ding, ding. It's like, okay. But it's not terrible. It's just fine. But I don't really need to hear it again, personally. It's like it's just not my favorite.
Fair enough. Do you want us to take us into Ticket to Ride?
I would love to because this is a perfect song. That jangly riff is absolutely incredible, and John's vocal is one of his best, swimming in emotion, and just the perfect like tone of delivery for the song, which I think is like an underrated craft when you're singing. I guess it's underrated, but a lot of people know that you're supposed to sing a song a certain way to get a certain emotion, but I think John Lennon was, especially in his time with the Beatles, was one of the best at just nailing what a song was about and how he was supposed to come across. Again, Ringo absolutely killing it. One of his best ever drum performances with the band, I would hazard to guess. Hazard to guess? I would guess it definitely is. But and this song is just, I'd have nothing bad to say about it, and it still probably doesn't make my top 20 Beatles songs, and that's just because they're the most insanely good band ever. Ticket to Ride is incredible. I love the message of it. I love just the vibe. Everything comes together perfectly. And then you get Yes It Is, which I've always seen as like a pseudo sequel to This Boy. It's not as tight harmonies as that song, but they still sound good. It leans a bit more into the sort of more poetic sort of songwriting. It's really catchy and memorable too, despite being a slower track. And again, very similarly to This Boy, John's voice towards the end of that sort of middle eight is great. The sort of the "It's my pride, yes it is, yes it is." Oh my god, so resonant, so emotional, so good. Um, yeah, Yes It Is great. Not quite as good as This Boy, but a very worthy sequel in my head canon. I don't think it's okay to officially call it a sequel, but I think it is. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. I'll agree with that. I actually have, I view it in kind of the same light. Um, just to continue on that conversation with Yes, it is specifically. Um, I don't think as a song it works as well as This Boy. um, and I think part of that is actually because of what they're trying to do with the harmonies. The I'm not We do not have time to get into the specifics, but I could nerd out about the harmonies of Yes It Is a lot. I think what they're actually doing, there's a lot of voice crossing, which is where one harmony part jumps above another. Like Lennon's melody is like going from being like the lowest part in the harmony stack to like the highest part. And like McCartney is jumping around all over the place. Like in terms of actual technical difficulty, it is a tier above This Boy as far as how hard that is to sing. And I think that's part of why it doesn't really work because, like, they're not able to execute it as consistently, I suppose. But yeah, I think otherwise it's structured very similarly. And I think lyrically, yeah, you could probably find some through lines there. And I agree, the vocals and the bridge section are fantastic from Lennon. Um, but yeah, Ticket to Ride. Again, I think you stole a lot of the things that I was going to say because you were also very intelligent. Look at all this praise, positivity. um, but yeah, I think it's kind of funny that John Lennon claims that this is the first heavy metal recording ever made. I think that's really funny, but um, I see where he's coming from in the sense of like if he's thinking of like metal having a certain drone type of like characteristic, like a sludgier type of characteristic, because in the verses you get that like consistent like A chord, I think it is, that like creates that sense of droning. I don't know. It's really there's a lot going on in this song that most people are not going to pick up on the first couple of listens. Again, the drum part I think is fantastic, one of Ringo's best. Guitars are a highlight, vocals are fantastic. Um, and I think this is the launching pad to what they are going to do on Rubber Soul. I think this is a preview to what they're going to do on that album. And I mean, honestly, I think it's better than almost any song on Rubber Soul. And I think Rubber Soul is a 10 out of 10 album. So that tells you how much I love Ticket to Ride. And again, the outro, the My Baby Don't Care in the falsettos, and again, an effective use of fade out, I think, in that sense. I don't know. It's a change up. It's clever because the Beatles are clever and because they weren't usually content with just having one song be predictable the whole way through. They had to shake it up. It's really well done. Love that song. Um, Help. Um, Backed with I'm Down. What is there to say about Help? I think this is another 10 out of 10 song. Again, like She Loves You, just throws you right into the song with um, no no preliminaries or anything. You're just in there. You're engrossed. And um, Lennon's lyrics here, again, you getting into that kind of confessional style that is going to become his trademark. So really, this is one of the first fully lyrically mature Beatles songs, I would say. Um, and I love the kind of it's not really call and response vocals what they're doing, but kind of like the backing vocals echoing what Lennon is saying. I think that's a little kind of girl group tribute, I suppose, that I think is really effective. Um, and I think verse and chorus contrast each other really nicely as far as like the chord choices and the melodic ideas. And I love how everything stops for the please, please help me section. It's so well done. And again, dynamics. It's something that the group is so good at. That final verse where everything strips back and it's just the acoustic guitar like strumming as they're singing that final verse. It's so well done. I adore Help every second of it. Fantastic. I'm Down, the B side. Paul McCartney doing Little Richard, or doing a Little Richard imitation since it's an original song. Um, it's that's what it is. There isn't anything more to it. I think Paul McCartney doing Little Richard is pretty damn fantastic for the most part. And if people have not seen the Shea Stadium footage of them performing this song. McCartney's going ham. You have John Lennon sitting on the organ, and he's doing the thing where he's like sliding his elbow on the organ. I think that was the closing song they did for that concert. A lot of fun. Translates really well live. But there's not much more to say about it. It's pretty self-explanatory concept wise. So yeah, Tom, your thoughts?
Yeah, this pretty much epitomizes what you were saying for me about how a less than amazing B side should not drag down a terrific A side when we're judging these. I don't love the I'm Down that much. I don't really like Little Richard that much personally. His style is a bit. I don't know. I can't say I've like really dived into Little Richard, but just not appealing to me. It's a very distinct style, and I can really respect that because, in a way, he was a pioneer in a lot of ways in terms of his energy and his sort of unique sort of vocal style. But just not really my thing. Not really what I'm looking for from the Beatles, and especially not what I'm looking for from the Beatles in 1965. If we were talking about this song in 1963, I could be a bit more lenient, but I think they're just moving on to bigger and better things at this point. That said, Help. Oh my God. What a Titanic song. One of the real like classic, really sad song that bops so hard that you forget it's supposed to be sad. Those kind of songs are great. And this is, yeah, if you're in a good mood, it's not going to bring you down. If you're in a bad mood, it's going to be a comfort. And it's just, it works so well. The verses and choruses are equally catchy, which like, how do you do that when the chorus is one of the catchiest that the Beatles ever did? And again, George is like, just like with She Loves You and other comparisons to that song, George is subtly adding texture and mood throughout the song with these guitar parts that don't really take that much attention at all, really. But they propel so many of these songs by just filling out the background and giving it like an ambience and an atmosphere that goes beyond really, musically, this is very, very similar to what they were doing 2 years ago. But the arrangement and the song structure and the lyrics kind of, even though it has that sort of memorable melody, kind of like I Feel Fine, I suppose, in terms of the lyrics of that song, it sort of defies that and it becomes its own thing and it becomes new and fresh and exciting. And it's still new and fresh and exciting in 2023, which is crazy. And then we go to We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. Now, I mentioned earlier, I'll be interested to see your take on this. There are so many turning points within this list. This might be the biggest one. And that is in no way a disrespect to Help. I think Help is a perfect pop song. We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper just sound like a different band. Like if you didn't like recognize the vocals, there is so much else going on here. They've clearly moved ahead in their thinking and their influence so much. And yeah, it's a joy to behold. This is such a great single. We Can Work It Out amps up the psychedelia and Baroque influence, while also retaining the sort of immediacy of their pop tendencies, which I love. It's really ambitious musically. I love the change to waltz time at the end of the chorus. So cool. And I think this is probably their first true studio masterwork where the arrangement is just so dense and is doing a lot of work for what is an already great song. But I just think, oh my God, it's so cool. Another great outro as well. It's less of an outro, more of like an end because it doesn't fade out. But it's like that sort of last little bit instrumental is such a cool way to put a bow on the song. And it does feel like Paul wrote this really catchy, really good song, which it is. I love the lyrics here. It's a very simple message, but I like the idea of this like misunderstanding as a concept to build a song around. And it's such a catchy song, but it feels like the arrangement and production takes all the potential possible out of that song and just explored it, which is incredible. I don't love Day Tripper quite as much, but We Can Work It Out is definitely in my top 20 Beatles songs, so that's a high bar. And even if the rest of the songs sucked, it would be worth making any Best of Beatles comp just for the riff alone. The riff is fantastic. And the song itself is really catchy as well. Yeah, it's just an incredible pair of songs, really. And it's We Can Work It Out for me does overshadow Day Tripper a little bit, but only because We Can Work It Out is, I think, a masterpiece. And Day Tripper is only amazing instead of a masterpiece. How dare it?
How dare it? Exactly. Um, Somewhere in my parents' house, there's a cassette tape of me trying to cover "We Can Work It Out" in like early 2008 when I was still trying to get into the Beatles. God, I'll need to dig it up at some point. It's the first time I ever tried to do anything musical, and I'm sure if I listened to it now, I'd be like, "Aw," and then, "Oh God," simultaneously. Um, Also, hypothetical because this came out and was recorded in tandem with Rubber Soul, the single. Hypothetical situation: take out "Wait" from Rubber Soul and replace that with "Day Tripper" in the same spot, and then take out "Run for Your Life" and replace "We Can Work It Out" in the same spot. When I'm thinking about that, just like in my head right now, I'd be like, my God, like you take that out, and to me, that's a contender for best Beatles album. Like right now, for me,
Yeah,
Rubber Soul is like just short because of a couple of those weaker tracks, but you put those in, to me, that at that point, it's on par with like Revolver, in my opinion.
I think those would be the two I'd take out as well.
Yeah.
Run for Your Life, it's a tricky one because I think musically it's so like it's just great. It's catchy, it's energetic, it's great. Just the lyrics, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think it's a terrible song. Like I see some people like dismiss it as one of the worst Beatles songs. I don't think that's true. But as a note to end the album, just no, 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 no. And
No.
We Can Work It Out instead. Like if Run for Your Life was an A side, I think like it would work. It's catchy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it'd be standalone, and We Can Work It Out as an album closer, leading us into Revolver with those Baroque and psychedelic influences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't. Run for Your Life could work on the album potentially, but it does not work as a closer at all. It's just a weird note to end on. We Can Work It Out feels a lot more conclusive. Um, but yeah, I agree with everything you said pretty much. We Can Work It Out. The whole single is fantastic, and to my ears, the best complete single that they've released to that point, pretty easily. Um, yeah, there's We Can Work It Out. Again, it's like it works so well. It is so smooth that you almost don't even notice the little things that they're doing that are like really unorthodox. Like that vocal melody is like, I'm not saying it's hard to sing, but like rhythmically, it is just kind of offbeat enough to where, like, when I tried, if I try to like sing along to it, sometimes I get kind of mixed up as far as like what measure we're in. It's just off enough to throw you off. I love the harmonium there that Lennon's playing, adding that little pedal to everything. Um, and what is it? Going off of memory, I think a tambourine or something that jumps in like in the chorus with when they say "We can work it out, we can work it out." Just one little addition right there, like adds that little extra bit of momentum to those lyrics. And I think it's just a little, I don't know if I could call it text painting, but I think it augments the line, the bit of lyric there, which is really cool. Bridge is fantastic. Um, I agree with what you said about the waltz time. I think McCartney's vocal is very smooth. Lennon adds the subtle harmonies there in the bridge. It's perfect pop music. Perfect pop music. Day Tripper, all about that riff, man. All about that riff. That is a riff that most bands would kill to have and to write just once. And I suppose in a way, a lot of bands have written riffs that were probably inspired by this one on some level. Um, I think the vocals on here are fantastic. Again, McCartney kind of leading everything. And I love how he kind of goes into his falsetto in like the chorus when Lennon enters. Uh, yeah, it's really tight. Again, it's kind of like Can't Buy Me Love in that I don't know if there's a whole lot I could say about it from a song structure standpoint that is super, super sophisticated, but it doesn't matter because the guitars, the rhythm, the vocals, everything else is just driving it. They they did play it live, and I mean this was a period where they were not like they were not great live during this period because they couldn't hear themselves, but put them in a proper setting where they could, I could not imagine how good this would have been. I imagine it would have been absolutely fucking fantastic. So yeah, fantastic single. And again, to my ears, the best to that point. And so it's a damn shame that it would then be followed by Paperback Writer, Backed with Rain. I love Paperback Writer. I love this song so much. Again, you have, I keep going back to the harmonies because there's one of my favorite parts of the band. That intro, which is like, it's 5-part harmony. It's 2 tracks of Paul, it's 2 tracks of John, and then 1 track of George and falsetto at the end. Um, so clever. I can't quite, I don't know for sure if there's like a clear Beach Boys influence there. But I mean, there's, because they took from so many harmony groups that it's kind of hard to say. But it it works so well. Again, the guitar riff on here that anchors that song is so well done. Drum part with like Ringo's like hi-hat flourishes on here. So freaking good. The little bit towards the end where like the final verse, where John and George are like singing the lyrics to Frere Jacques in falsetto, just randomly in the background. I mean, it's one of those like jokey inclusions on the level of like them singing tit 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 in girl, but most people don't pick it up, and it's just kind of a little inside joke, which is really funny. And also the feedback or like the echo effect that they do on the vocals at the end right before they do these little acapella parts. I think that's just such a cool effect. Nothing bad to say. Fantastic song. Again, 10 out of 10. And the B-side is 10 out of 10 too. I think Rain is terrific. I've seen some people who love Rain enough that they're like, why wasn't this released just like as a standalone single or something like that? I don't think this would have worked as an A-side. But for what it is, or I mean, if it had been included on Revolver, although in that case, I don't know what you kick out to get that song, because I think every song on Revolver works in that context. But
just put another song on Revolver.
I mean, sure, yeah, why not have both? But yeah, the vocals are great. I think one of I promise I will not tangent on this too much, but the Super Deluxe Edition box sets that have been coming out, which are really,
I think I know where you're going with this. I think I know where you're going with this.
There's been a lot of like revelations with them and the research surrounding those songs. And the Revolver box set, the most recent one, has had a couple. Number one, She Said, hey guys, Paul actually played bass on that song. People thought Paul had left because he had an argument or whatever, and that it was George who played bass. And then guess what? They include like an outtake or like the instrumental track or something, and Paul's the one counting it in. Like, pretty obvious evidence that he was playing bass. The other one, Rain, this is slowed down. This is a slowed down rhythm track. You listen to the original version, like people were already calling this like Ringo's best drum performance ever with the slowed down version. And then you hear the original version, which is, several ticks faster. And it's like, oh my God, like he is going nuts on these drum fills. Like, I mean, it is, I can't say for certain if that's Keith Moon inspired drumming. I would be a little bit surprised if it wasn't on some level, but Ringo, maybe he's stretching himself to his technical limits here, but he does a pretty damn good Keith Moon impression here. It's so good. Everyone talks about the backwards vocals and backwards guitars in this track as well towards the end. I think it's really effective. I also love the refrain and how the refrain is just like these chanted choruses of rain while all the instruments drop off. It's a masterpiece of psychedelic rock. It fits right into everything that they were doing in Revolver in this time period. And this is going to be a contender for my favorite Beatles single, straight up. We've got a couple of others that are going to be very damn close, but this one and the last one, I suppose, it does not miss. I think it's just perfection, A side and B side.
Yeah, it's always hard. I think it says a lot about the two albums. And I don't mean this as any disrespect to Rubber Soul. Rubber Soul's really great. It was my album of the year for 1965, so obviously I love it. But Revolver is just a different kettle of fish, man. Like, how we can just be like, yeah, if we can work it out with some rubber soul, it'd be amazing. With Revolver, it's like, what do you even take off? Like, it's all
Yeah.
so good. Um, and you know, Paperback Writer would have been great on Revolver, but it's great as a single alongside Rain. What I love about this, and you mentioned it might be Beach Boys influence, I think it definitely is. And I love the Beach Boys. I think they have some fantastic songs. God Only Knows is at one point was my favorite song of all time. It's probably still top five. I think that this is maybe it's not supposed to be, but I've always read it as like a fake out where it's like you think you're gonna get this like dreamy Beach Boysy type song. You get that into the paperback writer, and then it's like, oh my
Mhm.
god, it's so it just gets me every time. It like sucks you in into thinking it this like dreamy like song, and then just no, this is a hard rock song. You are not ready for it. And as much as the riff on Day Tripper is great, the riff on Paperback Writer is even more relentless and even more powerful. Oh my god. Uh Definitely top 20 Beatles again, like we can work it out was, might be top 10. It's just impossible to deny. It's so full of grit and gnarl. It's like, it's so cool. It feels like a precursor to power pop in a lot of ways. In terms of having those like really like beautiful harmonies and that just sort of like, that just anger factor. And yeah, it's so cool. It's like one of those songs that's so great that I can't really explain it. I've just got to like make noises and hope that you understand that this is like a guttural reaction to this amazing music. And then Rain. Rain is definitely a very good song. Um, and I definitely agree with you. I knew where you're going with that. The original drum take is absolutely crazy town. And maybe like a couple of years ago, I would have been one of these people that is like, oh, Ringo's a good drummer, but he's not amazing. He's not as good at drums as Paul is at bass or George is at guitar. But I think once you've sat with these songs enough, Ringo doesn't really, he isn't Keith Moon. He isn't like right in the forefront with his drums. A lot of the time, he is on a few songs. And I think my argument went from like, oh, Ringo's not that great apart from Rain and apart from Strawberry Fields and apart from A Day in the Life. And I was like, hang on. And then I was like, no, he's a brilliant drummer. And I just sort of like accepted this narrative that has been shoved down all of our throats, which just isn't true. Um, and I was naive for that, and I'm willing to give Ringo's flowers. Phenomenal drummer, fantastic. Um, Rain, I think it works with the slowed down drums. It is such a cool effect, like you wouldn't even know if you weren't told, which is so cool. Um, when I'm in the mood for like the more trippy side of the Beatles, which is not always my preferred style from them, this just hits perfect. And I think my favorite period for John Lennon's vocals is 66 and 67 when he's really doing this sort of like drawly, like emphasis on the accent, like just, you know, off his face on drugs voice that is just so powerful. And yeah, I do really like Rain. It's just a testament to the Beatles that I sound less positive on this one than a lot of the ones we talked about. Because yeah, I will say the next two singles we're talking about are both like discussion minefields. So I'm really intrigued to see. I guess I'll go first on this one with the eternally divisive Yellow Submarine. Oh boy, how do we talk about Yellow Submarine? I think it's a fun track. It is one of my least favorites on Revolver, but that is one of the greatest albums of all time. So, you know, I'm not exactly slighting it. I think it's got this like really like try hard production, which depending on my mood, I either find it like way too much with all the like sound effects and stuff. But I think most of the time I find it pretty endearing and funny, and I think they kind of knew what kind of song they were making. And I've mentioned this before on my channel, but my favorite part of the song is in the chorus when you can hear George's sort of really low register vocals where he sounds like he wants to kill himself. And he's like, we'll live in a yellow submarine. It's like, oh my God, he sounds so miserable.
You know what it makes me
Um,
think of? It makes me think of that video clip of Bob Dylan in We Are the World, where he just looks like he is absolutely like he really wants to crawl into a hole. That's exactly
Yeah,
what
it's
I think.
great because the rest of them sound so into it, and George sounds like he just can't. He's like, "What? I'm leaving the band." Yeah, that clip from Get Back where he's like, "I'm leaving the band now,"
Mm-hmm.
is actually taken from directly after recording Yellow Submarine. Little known fact. But yeah, and then weirdly, I don't know if you can correct me if I'm wrong here. This is an A B single, right? It's not a double A.
This one is a double A.
Oh, it is a double A. Okay, I was going to
Yeah.
say because if Eleanor Rigby is playing second fiddle to Yellow Submarine, then we've got a problem. But if it's a double A, I can accept that. And Eleanor Rigby really needs no introduction. Absolutely god tier arrangement from George Martin. But I think that's obvious. I don't really have to say that again and again and again. I'm going to give Paul McCartney his flowers, who can be hit and miss lyrically. Um, this is an absolute masterpiece of songwriting and lyrics in particular, and his work in Revolver on in general, like Here, There, and Everywhere, like For No One. Holy shit! Like his lyrics on this album are, and Lennon's as well. But I think Paul, like lyrically, especially, was a cut above on this album. And yeah, it's a top 10 Beatles song for me. I just think the baroqueness of it is fantastic. It is unlike, well, I was going to say it's unlike anything you'll ever hear, but so many bands now have had their song where it's like vocals and an orchestra trying to do an Eleanor Rigby type thing. Like I know Depeche Mode have one and the Jam have one. Like it's become like a thing that bands do to do an Eleanor Rigby, which in itself is a really cool thing for a song to achieve. So yeah, it way ahead of its time in incorporating classical instrumentation into the pop sphere. Top shelf song.
Yes, I agree. It's funny. I don't even really think of the Eleanor Rigby Yellow Submarine double A side as like a single. Like it doesn't like click in my mind that they actually released these two songs together. Because certainly just stylistically, it's like it feels like total mismatches. I like Yellow Submarine. It's grown on me. It always felt a little bit out of place on Revolver to me. Although I think sitting with it more, I have more patience for that little kind of detour um, that we go through, especially when like this is another one where like listening to the Super Deluxe Edition box set, hearing like the original demo of what would turn into Yellow Submarine and realizing where it came from. It's like, okay, no, they didn't really just sit out to write a children's song. It was like a John Lennon song, very much in the vein of Help, that he didn't know what to do with. And Paul was like, hey, why don't we include these vaguely like kind of psychedelic lyrics based off a children's book that he saw or whatever. I don't know. The songwriting process, now that we understand it better, has helped me appreciate what the song actually is more. And yeah, again, it's cheesy, it's corny, but I enjoy it at least most of the time. Um, but yeah, Eleanor Rigby, what is there to say? It's to me, and I don't know how controversial of a take this is. I to me, this is potentially the best Baroque pop song of all time. I prefer this to anything on Pet Sounds. And I think the reason why is because, and I don't mean this as a slight to Brian Wilson, because the Beach Boys are one of my favorite bands. Brian Wilson, one of my favorite musical minds. But I think Pet Sounds is still very much kind of an outsider's look at what all of these different genres are. So when he's fiddling around with jazz ideas, Brian Wilson is not coming at it with a deep understanding of what jazz music is. He is someone who has listened to like 4 freshman vocal jazz records. He has enough understanding to be able to replicate chord progressions, but he's not engrossed in the genre. With Eleanor Rigby, again, that's different because this is not jazz or anything. This is like straight up classical music. They have George Martin. And again, this is where I have to give George Martin credit. The guy went to music school. He studied the work of Bach and all of these different kind of Baroque and Romantic composers. He understands this stuff, and he can give McCartney, in this case, the backing with this like dynamic string arrangement that like written by someone who understands the material. He understands how to write for strings and make it come across as evocative. And when you pair that with McCartney's lyrics, which I agree are among the best of his career, I think that just uplifts everything, because this is like professionalism, like experience coming together from all angles to create this just masterful song. Um, yeah, I think everything that you pointed out is something that I say is a highlight, and that I agree with. The one thing I'm going to shout out is on Anthology 2, there is the isolated string track of Eleanor Rigby. And I think that's on the Revolver Super Deluxe Edition. Please listen to that. Like, just give it a listen. It is gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous just on its own. And there is so much going on in and of itself that I think people will appreciate. So yeah, let's move on to the next, also double A sided single. And again, this is, they're all big ones, I suppose, but you could argue this is the big one. Isn't this the top rated one on Rate Your Music, or I think top rated of theirs at least? Penny Lane, backed with Strawberry Fields Forever. Again, I think it's 10 out of 10 songs on both sides. I mean, that's the long and short of it. Penny Lane, I always liked it, but it wasn't until, again, the remix on the Super Deluxe Edition from Giles Martin, which kind of made everything a little bit clearer, that I realized how much was going on. All the different instrumental ideas and the string parts and the piccolo trumpet. It's an absolutely insane trumpet part. I think like it's like outside the range of even a normal piccolo trumpet or something like that. So fantastic bit of writing. The song structure, again, there's like a whole, I've seen literal papers written by music theorists about the chord progression in Penny Lane. This thing changes keys like it's nobody's business. It's so well done. Another one where I think there's definitely like, again, clear, I think, Beach Boys influence in this song as far as like the songwriting piece of it. But it also doesn't really sound anything like it. Like it's a very different approach. It's a very English approach, I suppose you could say. And yeah, I adore Penny Lane, and I adore Strawberry Fields Forever, and I adore how the two songs like contrast each other, because Strawberry Fields is so like dark. It is such a moody song. Again, a technical masterpiece as far as like how they combine the two different takes together, in a way that like if you're not actively listening for it, you won't notice that transition. But even when you notice it, you're like, damn, that is smooth as hell. Again, I think you pointed out Ringo's drum part earlier, as being one of his career highlights. I agree. I think the kind of little sonic ideas, and the major changes in like instrumentation, especially when like the second take comes in and like you have like the little brass bits going in while Lennon's singing the verses. I think those are really cool. And then the outro, with like the little like piano bit as it kind of fades out and then it fades back into this cacophony of noise. And Lennon's like shouting out, or it's either Lennon or Ringo who's shouting out cranberry sauce or whatever. Which, I mean, you can talk about the whole like Paul is dead references there too. I'm not going to get into that, but it's an incredibly creative song. And even though this is the first single since Love Me Do that didn't go to number one, kept off the top spot by Engelbert Humperdinck, I believe. But I can see why this is not as like commercially like accessible to some people. Like this is definitely the most avant-garde thing they've done, but boy, has it held up well. Boy, has it held up well. And I don't think it's any stretch to say that they're still two of the most important songs of the 60s.
Yeah, this is a treacherous discussion and a treacherous debate to get into, but I'm not afraid to say it. As much as I adore both of these songs, I'm Team Penny Lane. I've always been Team Penny Lane. It is my second favorite Beatles song and my favorite one on this list of songs. So, you know, I just think it's just genius. There's not much else I can say that you haven't already. It's densely packed without ever feeling overstuffed. It all feels like it serves the song's sort of purpose of like sending you on a journey through childhood. Um, Melodically exceptional. The key changes make the song feel like it's about to burst, which is very, very much a thing I like when a song just feels like everything is just building and building and building and then just, just can't take it anymore. Yeah, it's a masterwork of Paul McCartney melodicism and a masterwork of George Martin production. And although I do prefer Penny Lane, I think it's only fair to say Strawberry Fields Forever is probably a more impressive production feat than Penny Lane. And again, Ringo just absolutely nailing it. I think a top five drum performance for him. And like lyrically as well, so many lines of the song have become iconic, particularly Living is Easy with Eyes Closed. I feel like that's like as a line has just become so synonymous with John Lennon, not only as a musician, but as a person as well. Um, it's a bit yeah, it's a bit more dour than Penny Lane. Um, and that works a lot in the sense that they are like a dichotomy that work together, but they're both sort of related to nostalgia and both sort of Baroque psychedelic songs. That aspect of it probably pushes it over the edge into being my favorite single on this entire list, just because of that connection between the songs, as well as them both being in my top 30 Beatles songs and one of them being my second favorite. So yeah, I can't really add much more to the discussion because so much has been said and everyone is right. um, but we've actually got quite a few Magical Mystery Tour related stuff to go through. And we got All You Need Is Love and Baby You're a Rich Man, which, again, we've talked about transitions a lot. I think, from We Can Work It Out to, I know we've got another sort of Magical Mystery Tour related single to come, but I think All You Need Is Love kind of marks the end of an era as well. It feels like the end of the collaboration aspect of the band, almost completely. I think it was slowly going in 67, and I think it is gone by 68. Obviously, they're still like playing on each other's songs, but it's a different songwriting process. And I think All You Need Is Love is this perfect marriage between their early, like, simplistic message. Like, it almost sounds like a song title that could have been on Please Please Me, like All You Need Is Love. And it's sort of married with that sort of more grown up, like profound, like worldly sensibility that they've sort of developed over time. I've actually always loved the verses even more than the chorus. I love John's like almost spoken nonchalant vocal. It's so cool. And like just, and again, it's John knowing how to sing every song he sings like perfectly. You're just hanging on his every word because he is just so captivating and charismatic. Without like showing off, he's just sort of like no 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 da, 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 da. It's just like he just knows that what he's saying is right. That's just so cool. Where not to rag on Plastic Ono Band because that's not what anyone's come here to hear about, but I think at times on Plastic Ono Band, John is like insisting upon his ideas, and he's like, "No, seriously, listen to what I'm singing about." Whereas with All You Need Is Love, he's just like, "Yeah, I mean, I'm right." That is so much more just captivating to me. Yeah, again, densely packed production. Maybe you could argue this one's a bit overstuffed with just stuff. There's like a lot going on, and the mix doesn't feel quite as crystal clear as the previous two songs we talked about. But the song itself is so great that it doesn't really matter. And then you got Baby You're a Rich Man. It's almost as if side two of Magical Mystery Tour is really good because this is another great song. Superb bass line from Paul, and I don't know, the song has a really unhinged feeling, like just something really like off about this song, which I really like. And I kind of think, I don't know what you think about this. Maybe, I think maybe it should have been All You Need Is Love and Hello Goodbye, and then I Am the Walrus and Baby You're a Rich Man as the singles. I get that Hello Goodbye and All You Need Is Love are both more like A sides, but I feel like having Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever work so well together, you could have had Baby You're a Rich Man and I'm the Walrus, which are both very enigmatic songs lyrically, whereas I'm the Walrus is really playful and silly. Baby You're a Rich Man is quite sinister and sort of grimy. And I guess you could have gone with that same idea. I don't know how you would link Hello Goodbye and All You Need Is Love now I think about it, but it worked in my head for a minute there. Um, but yeah, Baby You're a Rich Man is great, used great at the end of The Social Network. Yeah, great song.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's an interesting um thought to kind of like it's an interesting hypothetical, like if they switch the songs around. I agree that in the sense of like I think All You Need Is Love and Hello Goodbye are clearly like the commercial A sides. And I think there was a sense of like I don't know if internal panic was the right word, but I definitely think they took Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields not hitting number one, and they were like, "Oh shit, hey, we're not on top anymore. Let's just make sure we can actually do that now." But it is an interesting thing to think about. I don't even know would I Am the Walrus be like the better A side choice in that hypothetical situation? Probably, but yeah, I'd be interested to see how that would do as a standalone single. Okay, uh, I don't love All You Need Is Love. I don't. I will say, like, that song, like you cannot dissociate that song from the context of its creation, you know, created for this whole multi country international satellite television production. Like it was meant to be this big, like technological international event, and everyone who was participating was making these statements. And that was the whole intent of the song, was to make that statement. And I think, I probably I agree with you in the sense that I actually prefer the verses to the choruses. I don't think there's a whole lot to the chorus, although I do like the kind of call and response, Lennon singing All You Need Is Love, and then the orchestral instruments answering. I do like that. And the guitar solo is really nice. Um, but I think lyrically, I don't know. It fits right in with like the core of the whole Summer of Love idea, which was a utopia that was, I mean, it was short lived. It was very short lived, and it was always going to be. And I think maybe I am giving like putting All You Need Is Love down a little bit because of kind of the fact that it just didn't really age well. Like it ages well as an ideal, but like in terms of the specific time that it represented, it did not. And also, I will admit that I don't have a lot of time for Lennon's social statements from post Beatles either, whether it's Plastic Ono Band, whether it's Imagine, which I do think is a nice song, but I don't know. I won't get into that because that's a controversial take we don't need to have right now. Um, but it's pleasant. Again, when I say I'm not crazy about it, that's in terms of Beatles songs, which still means I really like it overall. Um, and Baby You're a Rich Man, yeah, very eccentric track. I would not say this is one of my favorites on Magical Mystery Tour, but I also think Magical Mystery Tour is a fantastic record. So again, it's all relative. I really love the little I had to look up the name for it, clavioline, the little synthesizer bit that kind of adds that real sense of uneasiness there. I agree with you about Paul's bass line. Um, Lyrics there, or the vocals are kind of like um, aggressive sounding. It's an interesting. Again, I think this is like a perfect like B-side type of track. On the actual album, it's kind of strange where it fits. I mean, the record itself is kind of uneven. Like it's not exactly a record that lives and dies on its album flow. It survives on the strength of the songs, which are across the board pretty much fantastic. But yeah, on the actual album as kind of the penultimate track, I don't know if it really works, but as a B-side, I think it works just fine. Um, so yeah, not I mean, it's the weakest of the 67 singles for me, as which we'll get to, but that's not saying very much because the one we're going to get to right now Hello Goodbye, backed with I Am the Walrus. Again, I think 10 out of 10s on both sides. And, you know, with Hello Goodbye, it's very lightweight. I think this is like, and that's the biggest criticism you could probably levy towards it. Like, this is very much like Paul getting into what he is going to quote unquote explore later on with Wings, which is songs that lack any substance whatsoever, but just have such amazing melodies and hooks and productions that I don't care. Um, and that's really what Hello Goodbye is. Like, Penny Lane, at least you can argue those are very descriptive lyrics. Like, they paint a particular time and place. Hello Goodbye is absolutely nothing, but I don't care because it's a beautiful song. Uh, really great melody, hooks all over the place. I love the kind of ascending kind of guitar lines during the chorus, the da 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 da. And then how like the backing vocals echo that, and I think it's the second chorus. Just little bits like that. It works, it works effectively as a pop song in the most unsubstantial way. Um, and I like the outro too. I think that's kind of fun. Um, so, you know, is what it is, but I'm very partial to it. Very, very partial to it. And then I Am the Walrus. Again, it's one of Lennon's finest achievements, just across the board. Um, it means nothing. It's I guess that's the through line to the single, I suppose. None of it means anything, but um, but in a way, like especially if you read like Lennon's actual writings from this period, if you've ever read either of his books um, that he wrote during this time period, like Lennon is masterful at making nonsense and making kind of nonsensical lyrics that go together. Like you can form the connections to be like, okay, yeah, I see he replaced this word for this word, or he like it's very like catch 22 like for anyone who's read that novel. It's kind of builds off of that idea but takes it to an extreme. And I Am the Walrus really plays with that in a musical standpoint. And when you combine that with the production, um, which is pretty close to Strawberry Fields level, if not, I don't know if I quite put it on the same plane, but it's very close for me. Like they're neck and neck. And again, just kind of the musical ideas. Again, the sitting in the English Garden bridge section where everything kind of strips back. They're incorporating the little like radio show noises from times that don't add much of anything, but again, it's not really the point. They're just there to kind of build this noise. You have the kind of interweaving like male and female vocals at the end during the outro. I don't know. I mean, again, it comes back to we are in prime psychedelia here. We are at a period of time where LSD is the rage, and those of us who are more fixated on lyrics being the most important parts of songs are not necessarily going to be drawn to these singles. I think for me, I can look past it because I'm very fascinated by what they are doing production wise in this era. So even if like even All You Need Is Love, which is a song that just in general is not one of my favorite Beatles songs, I can look past the fact that the lyrics don't mean much of anything to me and say that is still an incredible sounding song and is very well structured. And I can do the same thing with Hello Goodbye, which means nothing from the lightweight standpoint, and I Am the Walrus, which means nothing from the drugs LSD standpoint. I can appreciate them as like pop songcraft. And I think it's again at pretty much the highest level of what people were doing back then. So to me, 10 out of 10s on both sides.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard between. I think this one is my least favorite of the 367 singles, but it's not like that far behind. All You Need Is Love, Baby You're a Rich Man. It's quite close between those. Um, Hello Goodbye is my least favorite of these six songs. I still think it's really good. I just think it's a little bit repetitive and lightweight. Even if you compare it to like a song like Penny Lane, which lyrically is very repetitive, but it keeps the song fresh by adding new elements, the trumpet solo, the key changes. This song kind of just goes and goes and goes. I do absolutely adore the outro. That's my favorite part of the song. It's almost like a jump scare. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think it's a good song. I see why it was chosen as an A side. But yeah, it's not my favorite Paul song. And then I'm the Walrus. Usually I'm Team Paul over Team John, but on this particular single occasion, I am Team John. I think I'm the Walrus is like the ultimate troll song. Like it's just John's vocal delivery is like perfectly snarly and dismissive. And I wrote down that I don't know if there is another song to which I know every word where the words are this strange. And I
Yeah.
think that is a testament to both the wild mind of John Lennon and the sort of irresistible sort of comeback value of this song where you just keep wanting to come back to it. That's partly down to the dense production, but I think it's mostly down to the songwriting. And it is just really captivating and really, really interesting. So yeah, that's my take on those songs. Not as much to say about them because I think there's less to say about them personally. But yeah. Next we've got Lady Madonna and the Inner Light. This is the first of two singles from like what post 65 where I'm like, this is good, but we're like breaking up a run of some of the greatest music of all time with good music. Um, which again is not a bad thing. The Beatles released a good single, like wow. They've really sunk to whole new lows here.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think Lady Madonna is like a solid like 7 out of 10 song. Um, I think the melody is cool. It's not like an all-time melody. I think the lyrics are almost completely nonsense, at least to my ears. I know there's like some level of like backstory to it, but like, sort of, at least with Hello Goodbye, that had like a really irresistible melody, and this song, the melody is good. It's like a well constructed, good song, but and it's actually one of the few times where I feel like a George Martin arrangement, similarly to All You Need Is Love, is a bit unfitting. The sax that comes in is really invasive and just doesn't fit the song at all for me. And I feel like the song would have been better without it. Um, my take. But yeah, it's still a Beatles song from this era, so it's still going to be good. Paul's vocals are fantastic and really charming and kind of elevate the song on their own. Cool bass as well. So yeah, Lady Madonna's good. In a Light, um, George's Indian songs. Love You Too, I think, is exceptional, and it sort of blends the Indian instrumentation as well as Norwegian Wood, which is a hell of a compliment because Norwegian Wood is a terrific song that blends them seamlessly. Within You Without You, I find a real drag, and I just don't like it that much. It's also its spot on Sergeant Pepper is like I don't know, and I think The Inner Light is kind of in between for me. I think it's good, not great, similarly to Lady Madonna. I think I slightly prefer it over Lady Madonna just because of its sort of unique instrumentation and it doesn't outstay its welcome, unlike Within You Without You for me. It's not really a song I reach to that often, but when I do hear it, I like it. It's on Past Masters Volume 1 and 2, which how have we gone like nearly 2 hours into this video without mentioning Past Masters because it's probably the greatest compilation of all time. I mean, I also own the Blue Album on vinyl. The Blue Album's great, but uh, Past Masters is just so comprehensive and like for a collector of Beatles stuff, Past Masters existing is such a blessing. So yeah, and actually listening to all those songs in sequence is such a cool activity. It's like watching a Beatles documentary of like their entire career in an hour and a half. It's so cool. Um and yeah, so The Inner Light, it was never one when I was listening to that because I've heard that comp a lot. It was never one I would hear and be like, yeah, I could kind of do without this. It's more like, yeah, this is good. and that would be kind of the extent of my emotion towards it. So, yeah, a solid single, which to most bands would be like, yeah, we're happy with that. I think the Beatles could do better, and the next two singles are going to sort of stamp that even further for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, I do really like Lady Madonna. I do like it quite a lot. Fun fact, I didn't know when I was just glancing at Wikipedia just now that Ronnie Scott, the saxophone player, played the sax solo from I Missed Again by Phil Collins. So there you go for any Phil Collins fans who are watching this. Um, yeah, I don't know. Lady Madonna is I think in a way it's sort of like serves as a precursor to what they're going to do on Let It Be in the sense that it is a throwback to like early rock and roll kind of ideas, and is more stripped back. It's not completely stripped back because again, you have that kind of barrage of saxophone and the little like filtered vocals that they're doing as well, like in the little solo section. But I think Paul's piano work on it is great. Um, I like the vocal that he does. It works for what it is, you know. I think, you know, of the songs that they were recording, because this whole like short period of time in like February of '68 when they're recording these songs is very strange because they end up with Lady Madonna. I think Inner Light was recorded at around this same time, but that was kind of George solo with his own people. And then Hey Bulldog came from this period as well. And I think Hey Bulldog, for just completely embracing the silliness of it all, works even better than Lady Madonna. Um, but also, again, I don't think it would have fit very well as an A side. I think Lady Madonna is just fine from what it is. And even though, yeah, I don't think it's as good as what is surrounding it for the most part, I still think it's very sharp, um, and well done. The Inner Light is one that I struggled with for a very long time. Because, yeah, I did struggle with George's kind of the influences of raga music and stuff like that on his sound. Because, I mean, I am, you know, we're from the West, right? This is a whole musical culture that is foreign to us. Um, but I have grown to appreciate kind of all of the three main Harrison entries into that catalog. Love You Too, Within You, Without You. Um, I adore that song just because that one is like, I don't know, it feels like I'm in like a trance state when I'm listening to it. So I agree that sequencing wise, it's a little bit weird because was it When I'm 64 that comes right afterwards that breaks you from that trance in a very obnoxious way. But I tend to blame When I'm 64 more for that because that's probably my least favorite song on the album. But I digress. The Inner Light is probably the song where that is Harrison diving the most headfirst into this style, like in the most uncompromising way. Like none of the Beatles play any instruments on here. It's just George, John, and Paul adding vocals, and then everything else is the uh, ensemble with tabla, harmonium, and what have you. And you know, I don't have enough of a knowledge of Hindustani music to really evaluate kind of how it compares to that genre in general. I think ultimately all of George's stuff is a, you know, a Western approximation of what that style sounds like, but also he worked very directly with people like Ravi Shankar. Um, so I believe it to be a very respectful way of implementing the style. And I like the I don't know what to call it, like the little like scalar figures, I suppose. I was going to call them riffs, but I don't think that's an appropriate term for it. That they do, and I think the version on the Concert for George live concert, which has like Jeff Lynne does the lead vocals, I think on that one. That one works really well live because the ensemble kind of branches off from the general structure and does more longer improvisations and things like that. So yeah, it's the one that I think most Western listeners are going to struggle with, but I think especially if you're in a situation where you get to listen to music by Ravi Shankar or anyone else and you get more exposure to that style, that culture, I think you grow to appreciate it more. At least that's what happened with me. So, all right. Another big one. Hey Jude, backed with Revolution. Um, so, first single that they did not release on EMI, they released on their own label, Apple. That is a major change for them as artists. Um, but it is not a major shift in terms of their song quality. Um, Hey Jude is such a pervasive song. I mean, I don't genuinely know what I can say about this one because this is one of those songs that every single person on earth has probably heard at least once. Um, you know, it's it's confessional is not the right word, but it does feel like it starts in a very bare sort of way, like it is Paul and his piano, and it's very intimate in a way that Beatles singles have not been in a very long time. Um, Not since Eleanor Rigby, I guess technically. Um, and then again, this song is all about the build, which everyone knows, all about the layers of instrumentation coming in. You have the vocals coming in, John with those like counter melodies and stuff like that. Um, and you know, the bridges are great, and Paul's getting more kind of energetic in his voice and then building up to that final like ridiculous scream before the 4-minute outro starts. You know, the I know people who struggle with like the outro of this song that think it's just like way too long and way over the top. My dad in particular continues to say that he can't stand the song because of how long the outro is. But you know, I think it's one of those things where they are clearly like playing with the length of a single and what that can look like. And they're stretching it to the I don't know about maximum possible runtime, but stretching it to the maximum extent that they think they can. And, you know, and in doing that, I think, essentially invent the idea of like arena rock. They invent this idea of a sing along chorus that an entire stadium can sing in unison to. And they're not really intending to do that, I don't think. I think they're just kind of intending to, like, they're not writing songs that are meant to be performed live because they're not performing live at this period of time. They're just trying to experiment with the single format. But by doing that, they've inadvertently influenced this whole genre and this whole culture of how we've experienced music in a live setting for the last 50 years. I mean, it's phenomenal. Um, so yeah, it's a great song. It's a great song, and it's one of McCartney's best vocals, in my opinion. Very dynamic, and I think his riffing in the outro is great stuff. Um, and Revolution too. Like the guitar sound on this is iconic. Um, I don't like using that word because it's overused, but I think it again just kind of smacks you in the face right when it starts. That very overdriven and heavy guitar sound. And, the lyrics, again, this is like, I mean, John is getting angry now. This is no longer peace and love. All you need is love, John Lennon. This is John getting upset about things. And, again, your mileage will vary as far as how tolerant you're going to be to that approach. To me, the kind of bluesy shuffle feel of this song makes it work. Um, I don't know if the lyrics necessarily work on their own super, super well. I think, although I do think there's some of the least preachy Lennon lyrics in this vein. I think he gets even preachier when he goes solo and becomes like completely free of the Beatles. So I'm still pretty tolerant of it. But yeah, great lead guitar. And the guitar solo kind of in the middle, I think is really cool. Um, there's some subtle electric piano by Nicky Hopkins here that I think really adds to everything. It's a very aggressive song, but also kind of it has enough hooks to still kind of reel you in. And again, it's another song that I think if they had been in the position to perform it live, which they obviously never did apart from an appearance on a TV show when they were promoting the single, I think that would have translated super well as well. And I think the image of the Beatles as a full group becoming these like staples of live performing in like the late 60s and early 70s and performing songs like this one, and as a group becoming like leaders of the peace movement or whatever rather than having it just be John Lennon. I think that's an interesting alternate reality to think about. I don't know what all would have changed, or I'm not saying they would have made any meaningful change to how the world works or anything like that, but just in terms of image, in terms of pop cultural influence, is an interesting thing to think about. But again, great single, front and back side.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think though, like inevitably you would have like a double A side single that is like Imagine and like Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey. It's like that would still be happening because
Yeah,
that's what Paul's brain was like. But it
yeah,
is interesting, like how far that push and pull could have gone with like where all their brains were at. Yeah, Hey Jude is a song that kind of defies description. What can you even say? I do think the na 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 bit at the end. I'm a big football fan, or soccer, as some of our American viewers may prefer me to say, and it is like so overused as a chant, uh, to just like na 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 na, and then some like 2 syllable message that you want to give the other fans. Um, that was really like my biggest exposure to this song. So that part like doesn't really hit as well. But I do like that it's got this epic length, and I do sometimes take the song for granted. I think Paul's verses are so well written, and it is very personal before exploding into this like big universal, explosion. Yeah, like I love the video. The video's great of all of them playing it together. They just look like they're having a great time, which is nice considering the where they were at the time, sort of as a collective. Um, and yeah, I just think it's a really, really fantastic vocal performance from Paul. Is it in my top 50 Beatles songs? Maybe. But that doesn't mean that I don't think it's fantastic. I just think about it less than a lot of other Beatles songs, and that'll be coming up again on a song later on. Um, I got a hot take for you. I prefer Revolution 1 over Revolution personally. I prefer that sort of more stripped back, bluesier, like I think it's just that thing about the White Album where it just feels like you're sat in like a living room and the four of the Beatles are just there playing, and that sort of more intimate vibe has always appealed to me a bit more.
mm-hmm.
Um, that sort of like acoustic guitar rhythm with electric guitar lead dichotomy as well works really cool, and I like the more like swinging rhythm to it. It's just I like that there's two quite different versions of the song that are both like instantly recognizable. I think that's really cool because you'd never like mistake them for different songs like 2 seconds into each one, but there's so much different about both of them, which is really cool. Um, so yeah, I do really like this version of Revolution. It's not the one I'd go to, but I can respect it and really enjoy it. So yeah, a weird single for me because they are two of the Beatles' most beloved and iconic songs, and I like them both a lot, but they're just not on my top shelf. I've got another hot take for you right away. I announced that Penny Lane Strawberry Fields Forever is my favorite single of this bunch. Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, number 2. I think this is just terrific. And I'm not the biggest Let It Be fan at all. Get Back is a song I've always liked, but this is a bit of a cliche to say it, but Alex has got the poster. Well, the poster is there. I can see about half of it behind him, of the documentary. And of course, everybody knows, even before I saw the documentary, the clip was going around online. It went viral of Paul writing Get Back out of thin air in like 2 minutes. And it is absolutely unbelievable. And having seen the strain they were under to put an album out, and like that they basically had like 3 songs for a long time, and then they slowly then had 5, and then they had like 20, and they're like, okay, we need to like narrow these down. Um, it's a really astounding piece of songwriting. Billy Preston's contribution on both of these songs is both like adding a whole new dynamic and creating an almost entirely different sound, but also completely seamless at the same time. It is so wonderful to, and like watching the videos them playing together, just seeing him with this like massive grin on his face, just being like, "Hey, I'm living the dream," is just so endearing. And yeah, Get Back is great. I love Paul's vocals. I really like it as an opener to the album. Um, is it the opener? Have I just missed? No, it's two of us, isn't it?
Yeah, two of us, the opener. Get Back is the closer.
Yeah, yeah. No, my
It would have worked really well as the opener.
yes, it would. That was the point I was trying to make. I've got like 3 things going on in my head at once, and I've just like completely messed that up. I knew like 2 seconds afterwards though, so it's fine. You can't take my Beatles credit away from me. We've been talking for like over 2 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think it would have worked great as the opener. It doesn't work that well as the closer because it's like this idea of like not really letting go the idea of the Beatles. I kind of like it as like, yeah, I mean, it would have worked as an opener. And then you got another song that we're going to talk about later, which would have worked way better as a closer to Let It Be. I wonder which song that could be. But yeah, I think Get Back is fantastic and probably a top 30 to 40 Beatles song for me. And it is paired with my third favorite Beatles song, Don't Let Me Down. My number one is Dear Prudence, by the way. If anyone was wondering, if you made it this far, you deserve to know. Don't Let Me Down. I don't really want to say too much more about this. I know you've probably got some nice things to say about it, so I won't go too far into it. If you do end up stumbling onto my channel or have watched my channel before, you'll know I've waxed lyrical about this so many times. So all I'll say for now is that every element of this song is perfect. Every instrument is played to an all-time great level, and I'm going to say it, I don't think John and Paul have ever sounded better in harmony than on this song. So take it away, Alex. I love this single.
I do too. I think it's my favorite.
Nice.
Yeah, it's close quarters between this one and then like that 3 single sequence with We Can Work It Out, Day Tripper, Paperback Writer, Rain. Then skip ahead to Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields. Like those ones, it's all really close, but this one, at least right now, I think is probably at the top for me. I am with you in the sense that I was never like that crazy about Let It Be as a record. And really, no, I don't think it works super well as an album, like as far as its construction and its sequencing and what have you. But this era of the Beatles, especially having not too long ago finally sat down to watch the Get Back documentary from start to finish because I put it off for way too long.
Me too. I did as well. I think I watched it like 3 months ago.
Yeah, I mean it's about the same time frame for me. That's about how long ago I watched it. It's I understand that documentary is probably taking a slightly more positive look at things than maybe what actually happened because it's correcting the actual Let It Be film, which probably took a more negative look at things than what actually happened. Truth is in the middle. I digress. Still, hearing them in that environment, especially when they moved to the actual studios as opposed to the fucking warehouse or wherever it was that they were doing the first part, and they get Billy Preston in and they're jamming there. That is amazing to watch. And yeah, Billy Preston to me I don't know if he's quite the key to these singles working, but I don't think this is my favorite single without Billy Preston being here. And again, alternative realities. If Billy Preston had joined them, and even if they had only played together for like a couple more years and had released like 2-3 more records, maybe, if even that, like that's a fantastic, like I get goosebumps thinking about how good some of those albums could have been. And even then he's on Abbey Road a tiny bit. But yeah, Get Back, is, yeah, you've said pretty much everything I wanted to say about it. The actual creation of the song in the Get Back documentary is fantastic. It the drum beat from Ringo here, that kind of not shuffle beat, but the thing he's doing on the snare drum is really, really effective. The electric piano stabs and the little solo that Preston does in the middle is just so, so good. Paul's vocal, this is something he does a lot in this area, this era of their career. It's not pure chest voice and it's not pure falsetto. He's doing something in the middle. Kind of, you could call it head voice if you want, but what he's doing is actually like it's kind of like a bel canto technique. You hear like Elvis do it a little bit, like in his later years. Very hard to do. I have tried to do it and I am not successful usually. It's actually very hard what he's doing. And you hear him messing around in this documentary and on some of these demos and on this song, and he's just doing it like it's nothing. Again, I think Paul McCartney is probably the greatest rock vocalist of all time. And to me, I actually think this song is an argument in his favor, even though most people don't think of it as a traditionally great performance. But yeah, great groove, great song. And yeah, it's interesting in that it sort of typifies an era of the Beatles that ultimately never really came to fruition as much as it could have and arguably should have. Um, but as a standalone single, it still works. But Don't Let Me Down, yeah, this is probably top five Beatles for me. I don't know for sure where it ranks there, but I think it's probably top five, and it's one of Lennon's finest moments. I think it is. This is confessional Lennon in a way that works for me so well because he is very raw. He is very. I mean, he's singing about his needs, right? I mean, he's singing to Yoko Ono in this case, and he's not reflecting on his past. He's reflecting on, hey, this is where I'm at right now. I'm, paranoid. I'm scared. This is someone who has been through trauma, who has felt loss. And he is bearing all of that in this moment, and I think it's really effective. It's some of his best vocals that he ever did. The electric piano again adds so much, especially in the choruses where after they sing "Don't Let Me Down," the electric piano kind of responds to it. It just it's tasty. That's the appropriate word for it. And yeah, to your point, John and Paul sound fantastic together. I love the decision that they made. I didn't know this until later that they initially they recorded this whole song as like a collective take, like in the studio with live vocals and everything like that. And you can hear it and it sounds good, but it's not as tight. They're doing 3-part harmony because they got George trying to sing a backing vocal and it sounds a little bit clustered. So they go back into the studio a month later and they overdub the vocals, they redo the vocals, and it's John and Paul at the same mic doing that sort of like harmony singing and like overdubbing each other. And it's so tight, so tight. John sounds fantastic, and Paul's harmony singing is fantastic. Some of his best ever here. Yeah, 10 out of 10 on either side. I think hopefully people are not underrating this single as much kind of in this post Get Back world now that people have had a chance to reflect on that era. But if you have been sleeping on it, don't. That's all I got to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I agree. Do you want to take the lead on the next one, or should I?
Oh yeah, I can take the lead here. Ballad of John and Yoko, backed with Old Brown Shoe. Uh, what to say? This is kind of an odd one. Um, Ballad of John and Yoko is interesting in that until last week, it was their last number one single. Um, which is kind of odd considering that this is really unlike pretty much anything else they ever released. It is just John and Paul, which I think is actually really cool. Um, you know, Not that George and Ringo don't add anything, but I think having this kind of dynamic where like, hey, John's playing like all the guitars and Paul's playing the drums, and that type of dynamic it works. And by all accounts, it was like an absolute blast for them to like create together. So it's kind of that relic of one of the last kind of genuine periods of camaraderie that they had. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is Lennon again. It's like proto Plastic Ono Band, where Lennon's kind of talking about his, relationship with Yoko, and he's like making himself the main character, I suppose. And it is what it is. Um, I think because he's like taking it for a laugh, like this is kind of a lark of a song. I don't mind it. Um, and it's how to say it. Like it's the closest thing they've come to really releasing a proper joke song as a single. And I think if you view it from that framework, um, and you understand the intent that this is not really meant to be the same type of serious thing that they were doing otherwise, I think it works really well. I love how Lennon and McCartney's vocals kind of bounce off of each other. Um, in like especially some of those ending verses and choruses, and the little like silly guitar picks and flourishes and whatever that jump in every now and again. There's like a little like descending piano line in the middle of it as well. I don't know. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun, and even if it's not at the same level as the others, from this era, I still think it's great. Old Brown Shoe is like I feel like this has to be like one of the most obscure Beatles songs just in general, a B side to an already kind of obscure A side. Um, but I think this is actually really good, and sometimes I might even prefer it to the A side. I love the shuffle rhythm. I think the kind of reminds me of For You Blue from the Let It Be album. I think there's a lot of overlap as far as like what George is exploring here, and um, yeah, in that sense, I suppose this has a bit of like the Lady Madonna appeal. It's a very like it's a throwback to blues rock, maybe like early rock and roll. And if you like that sort of thing, then you are probably going to like this song. Um, Again, great piano, like the drums on it. Um, but yeah, not a whole lot more to say about that one. But not one of my favorite, excuse me, not one of my favorite Beatles singles. But again, still really like it. Yeah.
As any of you with a list of these singles at hand will probably have guessed, this was the other one I was talking about, as well as Lady Madonna, where it's good, but breaking up some of the all-time classic songs ever. And yeah, very, very puzzling that Ballad of Johnny Yoko is their last number one single while they were all alive, especially with the two singles we're about to talk about. Kind of wild. Kind of wild. So yeah, not much to add really. I like Ballad of John and Yoko. I think it kind of feels like classic in the sense that it's hard to imagine a time where this song didn't exist. I don't know what it is about it. It's Lennon's lyrics paired with the melody. It kind of feels eternal. It's like he just woke up one day and like wrote this song, and I'm like, how? It just feels like that, and that isn't because it's an exceptionally brilliant song. I think it's really good. But it's not really a desert island disc for me, but I'm glad it exists, and it has always felt very familiar from the first time I've heard it. And then yeah, Old Brown Shoe. Um, this is a good song. I think it's sad that George got a B side for a Beatles single here, and this was the song he picked. Considering all those songs he was sitting on that we later found out about. Um, you know, like I think he'd written All Things Must Pass by this time. He'd written Not Guilty for sure. That's one of the demos on the White Album, deluxe edition. It's like, I don't know. The Old Brown Shoe is good. And it's like weirdly badly recorded. Like George's vocal is not recorded very well. It's really like tinny quality. And I don't think it's like helps it really. It doesn't really give it like a lo-fi edge or anything. I did note that with these two songs that the lead guitar parts in the verses are so similar in the two songs. It's so weird. Like the two songs that were put together and the lead guitar parts George wrote are very, very, very similar. So make of that what you will. But yeah, quite unremarkable, only because we've been spoiled, I think,
Yeah,
this single.
I agree.
And then probably the second biggest one that behind Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, this single, the double A that is Something and Come Together. Truly titanic single. I mean, can I really do a hot take when we're like 2 hours and 20 minutes into this recording? um, sure. I think Something is a little bit overrated, just a little bit. I think it's fantastic. It would make my top 50, 60 Beatles songs. The way some people talk about this song, I just don't get it to that level. I don't think it's one of the greatest love songs ever written. And I never have, but I've always liked it. It's always been one of my favorite tracks on Abbey Road. I think it's supremely constructed, and I think that is the main point for me about Abbey Road is that it's George Martin's best album. I think this album sounds unbelievably good. Um, the arrangements, the engineering, the production is all top notch. I really like the song structure. I like George's vocal. I'm glad that he got his chance to shine. I'm more of a Here Comes the Sun fan when it comes to George songs on Abbey Road. But I do really like Something. And I guess this is controversial now, but I like Come Together more than Something. For some reason, the reputation of the latter, I think largely due to overplay and so many covers of it. But I love Come Together. I think it's one of the greatest bass lines of all time. The bluesy, like rootsy feel of it is so cool. I think it might just be the coolest Beatles song ever. Like it's just cool. It's really cool. Just like it has this like swagger. Similarly, John's vocal reminds me of All You Need Is Love in those verses in the verses of this song, where he's just like this sort of like just he knows what song he's singing and he's just like really laid back, but also like demanding your attention. It's great. Again, Ringo absolutely slays on this song. Probably top 10 drum performance from him. It's just so badass. It's never been ruined by overplay. It just rips. I love Come Together. And what an opening track as well. Like, oh, so cool. Love it. So yeah, Something's obviously great, but just calm down, everyone. Okay, calm down. It's not a top 5 Beatles song. Let's get real.
Well, no, it might be a top five Beatles song for me. It's hard to say.
That's
It's
fine. I understand I'm in the minority, even though I still
yeah,
think it's amazing.
yeah. It's one of those things where I 100% agree with you in the sense that the production and the packaging really uplift that song, which is not me at all saying that this is like a mediocre or even a decent song just in general. I think this is a great song. I think this is a great song that is elevated by genuinely just stunning arranging, whether it's the like subtle strings, whether it's Paul's bass part, which I agree, Come Together is fucking terrific, but Paul's like little bass like movements in Something are like they work perfectly. And that's something he always does really well in these songs. It's just like because he picked up bass later on in life, he comes to the instrument with the melodic ear of a guitarist and a pianist. So that's why he's not satisfied with just doing root notes. He wants to kind of play around and do counter melodies and stuff. He does that a lot on what is probably my favorite Beatles song, at least right now, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I adore the bass on that song, and I love especially the remix from 2018 because it really emphasizes the crunchiness of it. And yeah, it's a diversion, but in any case, I think a lot of the stuff that actually works well with While My Guitar Gently Weeps, though, I think works with Something. Um, Both that just perfect like balance between the instruments, the guitar solo in the middle. It's very like it's not that there's a lot happening there, but it's subtle and like stately enough for it to work. Um, very, I mean, yeah, honestly, I hear a lot of Clapton in that kind of idea what he's doing here. Um, yeah, it's a beautiful song, even if the title is stolen from James Taylor. Um, which is a nice. I mean, James Taylor song is nice too, but I digress. Come Together. Yep, I agree with everything you said. It is um, seductive in its way, maybe, but it's definitely cool. It's got a fantastic groove. It's like I don't know. I it feels like it kind of like creeps along and like lurches forward in a very like unsettling way, but you're also kind of into it simultaneously. I don't know how to describe it, but yep, it's just one of Ringo's most creative moments on the drums. Like you said earlier, because I don't think I touched on it that much. I think Ringo is with the Beatles a fantastic drummer. I think Ringo is someone who rises to the level of what he is given songs wise. And when you get into his solo career, he has moments, um, but usually those moments are when he's playing on other people's songs. Like Concert for Bangladesh, the George Harrison live performance that he put together is a good example. Ringo sounds great on drums when he is playing there, but on his solo material, I can't think of very many songs at all where I feel like the drums stand out because he's not rising to the level of the material. And eventually, in his older age, he's just not really able to play the drums as effectively anymore. But with the Beatles, certainly, yeah, he rises to whatever Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison give him, and it's absolutely terrific. Um, yeah, no, Come Together is great. And I agree. Lennon's vocals are not loud, but they also absolutely demand your attention. It feels like he is stating something, it's like he's shouting through a megaphone or something, which makes sense considering this was originally meant to be like a campaign song. Um, and I will say the story of the copyright infringement on this one is very funny about how he stole the lyrics from Chuck Berry's You Can't Catch Me. Chuck Berry was like, hey, you can't do that. But and takes him to court. And then Barry's like, hey, actually, you can do that if you cover my song on a future album. And so he did. And that's how the messy as hell rock and roll album was born with Phil Spector from the mid 70s. But yeah, great, fantastic single. Nothing much else really needs to be said about it, I don't think.
First time I've heard that anecdote, so that's nice.
Yeah. Um, all right. And now we have the final quote unquote proper Beatles single.
2.5 hours later.
2.5 hours later. Let It Be, backed with You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. Um, it was an interesting.
What a pair of songs.
Yeah.
Insane that these two are packaged together.
It was, yeah. You talked about how there was a song later on that was released as a single that you thought would be a perfect closer to the Let It Be album. I think You Know My Name, Look Up the Number is a weird pick for that, but, you know, to each their own. No, Let It Be is great. It's, I will say it is maybe the Beatles song that has been the most hurt by overplay for me, which is a
Same.
shame. But as far as like what it's trying to do, um, it's really dipping into that style of like late 60s, early 70s, like vocal pop, I suppose. It kind of like how The Long and Winding Road is like meant to be like a Ray Charles pastiche a little bit. But not like bluesy Ray Charles, like what Ray Charles was doing at that point, where he's singing these ballads with like strings and stuff. Like Let It Be's trying to do that. And in a way, that makes it sound a little bit of its time, dare I say, but I'm also not distracted by it. Um, the McCartney vocal is really great. The drums I think are really solid here. I think this is the song that is hurt the least by the Phil Spector orchestration compared to Across the Universe and especially Long and Winding Road. Um, Long and Winding Road, by the way, another contender for my favorite Beatles song, but specifically the stripped back version that is on Anthology. I think that is fantastic. But yeah, and then the guitar solo. Oh, so many debates about the guitar solo on this song. Worth noting, the single version is different. It is a different guitar solo from the album version. I actually prefer the one on the single compared to the album. I think most people are flipped on that one. But to me, I think, yeah, I think this one I prefer. I think it fits the mold a little bit better. I think the one on the album is very in your face and aggressive. And maybe some people like that more, and that's totally fine. I like how it's a little bit more muted on this version because I think it kind of fits the aura of what they're going for slightly better to me personally. Um, but yeah, um, it's a great song, and again, one of those ones that is a household name. Everybody knows it, so not much more needs to be said. I don't know what you can say about "You Know My Name." Look up the number. You want to talk about joke tracks? Wow. Also, the creation of this song is very strange, in the sense that they created it in '67. I mean, this is like, you know, Magical Mystery Tour sessions era Beatles, and they create most of the backing track during that period, and then they shelve it and they just completely get rid of it for a while until around the time that they're recording Ballad of John and Yoko. John and Paul are like, hey, what about this song that we started working on? And then they add like the vocals and the chanting and the singing and what have you. Um, and again, it speaks to like how laid back that particular brief period of time was for at least the two of them. But yeah, it's your mileage is going to vary. I have grown to really like this song. I did not like it for a very long time because of how abrasive it is. I have grown to really like it. Um, but and this is where again I have to say, not only don't take away from the A side because of like how just off the wall the fucking B side is, but also I would caution people against viewing this as like the closer to the Beatles career. Like I don't think you're gonna I don't think you're gonna do well by picking any B side really, but especially a B side like this and be like, yep, that's the note they left us on. Actually, no, it wouldn't have been because they released this in March of 1970 and Let It Be was released 2 months later. Anyways, crisis averted.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so bizarre song, but I like it. This is not one of my favorite Beatles singles front to back, but I think as far as the main part of their career, it closes it out very effectively for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Regarding what you're saying about the string arrangements, I think my ranking in terms of like how well they fit goes across the universe. Let It Be, Long and Winding Road,
Hmm.
and I think there's quite a big gap between 2 and 3 there. I agree with you. Long and Winding Road gets butchered. Well, you didn't say that, but
No, I
Long and
feel
Winding
that.
Road, yeah, it does get butchered by Phil Spector, and that stripped back version is just so lovely. Yeah, Let It Be very overplayed for me. Prefer the album version. Um, but how can you not acknowledge it as one of the great achievements of Paul McCartney's songwriting career? Um, it came to me in a dream. That's a terrible impression, but we're so far into this video that no one's heard that, so it's fine. Really strong gospel influence here, which is really nice. Helped, of course, by Billy Preston's presence, giving it that sort of like very just lovely, like full, like sort of almost hymnal feel. And Paul's vocal is amazing again. I could probably go the rest of my life without hearing it and be absolutely fine, which is kind of sad. Um, Considering that's a similar thing I said about She Loves You hours ago. I think it's in a similar thing for me where I'm like, brilliant song, but just heard it too much. And I think the more interesting discussion is around the B side. You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, which is a song, believe it or not, I have always loved. I think this song rules. And I think I partly loved it because I bought Past Masters with my Christmas money, like when I was like 17 or something. Because I was like, this is just the perfect compilation. It's going to have all the songs that I don't have on the albums because I was planning to get all their studio albums. I'm still getting there. Um, and I didn't really know all the tracks, but I was like, hey, it's more Beatles to explore. It's going to be great. And then like their cover of Bad Boy, which I know is like not a very beloved track. I think it's great. I think it's so fun. The way John sings that hula hoop bit is so cool. I love it. And like, I think that's just a lot of my weird Beatles opinions have come from like listening to Past Masters loads when I got it, and just loving like the more weird, like quirky stuff that they were doing. And this is like the absolute apex of it. It's so balmy. I think the opening part is like, I think anthemic is a strong word. I think it's memorable. I think it's really
Mhm.
catchy. And I don't know. I like that the lads were like so jokey, which obviously anybody who's seen any studio banter clips will know, or any of the films or anything. But I think for the most part, that doesn't really come through in their releases. And this is when they're just like, this is us. And in that way, the fact that it's the closing track of Past Masters is kind of brilliant. I know that it's all just in release order anyway, but like as a way to close off the Beatles' career, it is like once you're so familiar with them already and you know all their other stuff, you come to this and it's just such a breath of fresh air. It's a release of anxiety. It's so funny. It's so natural. I think it's great. And I know a lot of people hate it. And I can't really blame them for that because it's so weird and off the wall. But this is not Revolution 9. These are two different things. And Revolution 9 is a story for another day. I think it works in the context of the album, but it's not really a song. This is a song, okay, everybody? And yeah, I'm glad that you like it as well, because I was thinking I was going to have to defend it even more passionately than I just did. So
Yeah.
I really like You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. And if I had to pick between listening to Let It Be and You Know My Name, Look Up the Number right now, I want to pick the B side.
I'd
Of
probably
course,
agree.
that's largely to do with how much I've heard the A side. But you know,
Yeah. Yeah. No. It's interesting to think of an alternate, like like an alternate universe where they're going back to like the stuff they recorded in 1967, and instead of drudging up You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, they drudged up Carnival of Light. And then we're talking about You Know My Name, Look Up the Number as like this lost classic Beatles track, and there's like 50 years of hype waiting for it to be released. I don't
and then
know
they do release it, and everyone's just like, "What? What the hell is this?"
exactly, which is what will happen if they ever release
Mm.
Carnival of Light by all
Mm.
accounts. But that brings us
We have
to,
three. Yeah, we have three songs left to talk about, which is
yeah,
insane because
yeah.
my mouth is so dry.
Well, I was going to say that brings us to a segue because you were talking about your like, your quote unquote weird Beatles opinions because you listen to Past Masters a lot. I have a lot of those from listening to Anthology a lot. Like I prefer the long and winding road version, even with John missing all of those bass guitar notes. I actually sometimes prefer the really slow bluesy version of Helter Skelter on Anthology to the actual version because I think it's just a really cool effect. But in any case,
Also, I just side note, I absolutely love "And Your Bird Can Sing." It's one of my favorite Beatles songs. The anthology version, where like the guitar parts are like a bit more jangly and a bit more different, where Paul is just cracking up and he just can't hold it together. That version is fucking incredible as well. I love it.
it's so
Anyway,
good.
carry on.
It's so funny. So yeah,
But also like those guitar parts, like how did I
yeah,
know the riff that George settled on is incredible too, but like they're so cool. How did they not make it onto another song? Anyway, sorry.
no, I agree.
Anthology tangent.
No, but it's pertinent to what we're going to talk about. So transition. Anthologies are really great, and I've heard a little bit of a rumor that they're going to be potentially reissued, maybe expanded. Who the hell knows? Um, but with the Beatles anthology project, the I think there was the push that okay, we need to release like promotional singles because we're doing both the documentary and we're doing the actual like albums for each part. And the three surviving Beatles, I mean, at that time they were not getting along. That's a whole story for another day. But the three of them were like, we don't want to release a single under the Beatles name without John Lennon having some sort of involvement. So Paul and Yoko connect. Yoko hands Paul 4 cassette tapes um, of demos that John recorded between like 77 and 79, which is also around the time that he was recording demos for what would end up on like Double Fantasy, for instance. So you're going to hear a lot of overlap with like Double Fantasy songwriting ideas and sounds and themes in these demo tapes. So Paul gets the tapes supposedly on the day that he inducted John into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and made that whole like really lovely speech. They bring the cassettes to the recording studio, um, and they work on all four of them. We're talking about three of them today because three of them officially made it out to release. The fourth was Grow Old with Me, which they opted not. They supposedly like tried working on it really briefly, but threw it away because one, it had already been released. It's on the Milk and Honey album that John and Yoko did. Two, I think they did not want to touch that song because of how like it would have been very morbid given that like given what happened with John. I think it would have been too difficult for them to touch. So
And
instead
I
we
think also
yeah, go
that
ahead.
song is like that song is so John and Yoko rather than a Beatles song as well, I think is the other thing.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. So what we get are the three singles that they worked off in the mid 90s, which are going to be the last three that we're going to talk about. I understand that they are not quote unquote canon. I get that. And I think they are all interesting enough to warrant discussion. Free as a Bird is the first one. Came out in December of 95. Um, I like all three of these songs quite a bit, as you'll find out. Free as a Bird is interesting because this is the one that was the least complete from a demo standpoint. So, like the bridge sections, the whatever happened to the life that we just knew sections, John had like an idea for it in the demo, which you can hear. Um, all three of the demos are on YouTube, but it's not completed. So, Paul and George finish up that. And they've said that they really appreciated feeling like they were like collaborating in the songwriting process. That said, um, it's not much of a song. It's the verses are identical. And I think maybe I don't think they could have pushed themselves to be more creative and change the song up even more without just having a situation where like, okay, John's in the first verse and then like nothing else, you know? So they're kind of, their hands are tied with this song and with all of them. But I think what they do to kind of work around that is still really effective. I like that Paul and George each get lead vocals in their own little sections. I really love like the section with the guitar solo, not even because of the solo, but because of Paul and George adding those harmonies. Jeff Lynne might be in there. Jeff Lynne produced all of these for anyone who doesn't know. Um, the one critique that I could see with this song, especially, is that it feels very much like it feels of its time in the sense that you could see people confusing this for like an Oasis song in a weird way. Like there's definitely Britpop ideas that they're throwing out here, whether it's conscious or not. And, you know, I don't know if that necessarily works against the song, like in a major way. I do like classic Oasis, but it dates it in a way. And I think this song, compared to the other two, is the most noticeably dated of the three. And when you combine with the fact that I think there's a bit less interesting of an actual song in there, this might be my least favorite of the three, but I still like it. I still like what they do. I also like the little outro as well, with um, the ukulele playing or whatever it is, and then the backwards vocal from John. It's quirky. It's interesting, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
This is my favorite of the three. um, yeah, I don't know. These ones are weird. I think I find Free as a Bird and Real Love more charming than Now and Then. We're gonna get to Now and Then. I have a bit to say about that because that song unsettles me a bit. And we'll get to why. But Free as a Bird, I think I like the hook of this song more than Real Love. I think it's more catchy and it's more. I guess I'm going to talk about Real Love at the same time because they were released around the same time, and the discussion of both of them kind of links together for me. Um, to me, the chorus of Real Love is a bit like amateurish. That sounds like sacrilege because it's fucking John Lennon we're talking about. But it's like it's real love. It's really real. It's like okay, nice. You know, it's like, and so I do agree that both these songs feel quite underwritten. I think Now and Then less so, which is definitely in its favor. Um, but yeah, I think they do feel a little bit underwritten, but I don't think that matters as much because they're both quite good songs at their core, and I do really like the bridges that they add to Free as a Bird. I think it gives it a really cool sort of extra dynamic edge, and I love George's vocals especially on Free as a Bird. Where it's like feel so, and it's like oh my god, he
Mhm.
sounds amazing, like almost miraculously so, given like all his health issues and stuff. Um, yeah, there's an uncanniness to this because they're like John Lennon songs produced by Jeff Lynne. I know Jeff Lynne loved the Beatles and he worked with Paul and he worked a lot with George. Would John Lennon have ever worked with Jeff Lynne? Probably not, I think is my take. Just because I don't think that John Lennon's style really goes with Jeff Lynne's production style. It's the same thing when I was talking about Tom Petty. Like, I don't think Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne are a good match. Like, just because of the kind of artist that Tom Petty is. He's rootsy, he's raw, he's a bit more rugged. Whereas Paul and George, you can kind of get away with it because George has that like spiritual side. So you having these like ethereal sounds works pretty well. And Paul is basically what Jeff Lynne based 90% of his songwriting off, right? So yeah, that's a toughie for me. I don't know if it is just that the demo. I haven't heard the original demos, but I think especially on Free as a Bird and Real Love, it sounds like there's like an ELO vocal filter on John's vocals. Like I just don't like that. I just don't. I like Jeff Lynne's production style for ELO. For a John Lennon demo, I don't know. But yeah, anyway, Free as a Bird, there's a real sense of frailty in all of their voices, which I think really carries the song. It gives it this sense of poignancy whilst also feeling quite grandiose. It feels quite sort of understated and frail as well. So that kind of counterbalances the production. Um, yeah, I think the chorus of Real Love does hit pretty good, but I do slightly prefer Free as a Bird. I think it just feels like they were a bit more into it when they were recording it. They sort of worked with it more, whereas Real Love, it feels like they're adding an accompaniment to a song rather than sort of sounds weird saying collaborating with John when he'd been dead for years, but you know what I'm saying. I do agree with you on the Britpop comment, although I think that is most felt on Now and Then of the three. Yeah. How do you feel about Real Love?
Yeah. Well, I want to like stick with one thing you said about Jeff Lynne just really quickly. Jeff Lynne's inclusion on this was controversial even at the time and even among the group members. Because with Anthology, because they had been fighting so much, I mean, they were not speaking to each other for a big chunk of the 80s, or like Paul wasn't speaking to George and Ringo. When they worked on the Anthology project, each person got to bring in their people to help collaborate. So like Paul brought in the person who is his historian and is now like the great Beatles historian, Mark Lewison, one of my favorite authors, even though George did not like him. George brought in Jeff Lynne for this. George had worked with him at this point. Ringo had worked with him at this point because he helped produce Time Takes Time. Paul had not worked with him yet. And Paul actually felt like paranoid and like distrustful about it, and he's been pretty open about it, like, oh, is he just going to take George's side for every like creative decision or something? But then they worked together and Paul actually got along with him well enough that he's like, okay, yeah, you can produce my next album, which is Flaming Pie, which is one of my favorite Paul albums. But yeah, it's definitely I don't know what Lennon would have thought. I know Lennon did like ELO as a band and did say some things to praise them, but yeah, who knows? I mean, I guess it would depend on like what Lennon's sound had evolved to by the late 80s if he had survived. It's hard to say. Real Love, you hit the nail on the head in the sense of like Real Love feels like they're adding accompaniment, because that's exactly what it was. Real Love was more or less a fully finished song. And there's like, it's hard to keep track because there's like a bunch of different demos that Lennon recorded of it, but he worked a lot on it. And so he had all the verses written at this point in time. So really the only thing they're doing is adding the backing vocals, the instrumentation, and adding the guitar solo in the middle. The kind of through line with the anthology tracks is that they were released in order of how easy it was to restore John's demo vocal. So like you mentioned, the ELO filter, that is the cassette tape quality, pretty much. They're probably doing some other things to augment it, like on Free as a Bird, for instance. Like Paul is ghosting John's vocal very subtly to like reinforce it. But yeah, for the most part, it's just like cassette tapes having shitty sound quality, pretty much. And Real Love, it was really bad and took hours and hours for them to literally go in each little part and try to reduce the hissing noise so that it wasn't as audible. Um, and then for Now and Then, they just were not able to do it, which is why that one got left off on the shelf for so long. Um, but yeah, Real Love, I understand that it's not as collaborative. And I think that because it feels like the most proper song of the bunch, and the most like fully fleshed out song, I think in that sense it is probably my favorite of the three. Um, I really like everything that they add, the vocals. I think just at its core, it is a lovely song, and absolutely would have fit incredibly well on like Double Fantasy or something. Um, the only real major downside that I have is that the I think because Free as a Bird did not like hit number one anywhere in the US or the UK, they were like, hey, Real Love, we need to make sure that this is more like accessible for modern audiences or something. And I think it was like almost 5 minutes long. So they sped it up. And so the version that you hear on Anthology is sped up. And because of that, all the vocals are pitched higher, which is why John, like, to me at least, kind of sounds like he's inhaled some helium in addition to being just kind of tinny. That throws me off a bit. But, you know, I still really like it. I'm adjusted to hearing it that way. So it's, yeah, great. I think it's really great. And I really like Free as a Bird too. But now we get into the newest one. And this is where I actually want you to start off with this one. I'm very curious to hear what your spiel, what your take is on the newest slash last Beatles single.
Yeah, I'm not the kind of person that wants to be like behind the times or, fear mongering or anything like that. AI though is a problem. I think we can agree in terms of the creative industry. Of course, there's been strikes in the Writers Guild of America relating to AI screenwriting techniques that may be pushed. I I just don't really get what the point is here. Like, I get that it's exciting to have a new Beatles song and everything, but it's not really a new Beatles song, is it? Like, it isn't really a new Beatles song. I would be much more interested rather than them going back with an old John Lennon demo and sort of like trying to recreate John and George's vocals and take some of George's old guitar parts and stuff and just try and recreate them. I think it would have been much more interesting to have, let's say, Paul write a song related to the Beatles with Ringo playing on drums that Giles Martin produces, right? For me, that just sounds more appealing to me. There's just something incredibly uncanny, especially about this song. And I don't know what it like. I can't really boil it down to one thing. It just all sounds off. It feels wrong that it exists. I don't feel comfortable about it. And if you want to like not you, Alex, but if you in the comments want to call me like a wussy for thinking that, I mean, whatever. That's how I feel. I don't need I mean, even Free as a Bird and Real Love. I I like them. I don't know if I needed them, you know? And that's especially how I feel about Now and Then. I think the production is way overblown. It sounds like it, I don't know, it sounds like the latest Blur album, which I did not like that much. You know, so I guess they're carrying on that sort of like Britpop influence. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think sometimes something is lightning in a bottle and you don't have to go back and try and recreate the old fire, especially when two of the band members are dead. So that's my take on now and then. Despite all of that, I think it's a perfectly nice song. I've heard it like 3 times now. I'm not really going to seek it out again because of the connotations of it all. Like, where is the limit with this stuff? Like, what happens when Paul and Ringo are dead? Like, do we have just another Beatles song that's like an old Paul demo, and they just like put like their summation of what the Beatles is, what a computer thinks the Beatles is, onto a song? I don't know. Maybe I'm just being unnecessarily paranoid, but that's just my gut feeling regarding not just this song, but the sort of the long-term connotations of the creation of this version of this song.
Yeah, now and then is an interesting one to unpack. Um, there's a lot here, and I think it doesn't help that this was way more successful than I think anyone was expecting. Um, people, I don't think people were really expecting this thing to like make any sort of impression on the charts. Like it would probably chart because it's the Beatles, but Free as a Bird and Real Love didn't make number one or anything like that. Now and Then comes on and knocks off Taylor fucking Swift from the number one spot in the UK charts and gets to what, number seven, I think, on the Billboard Hot 100. Um, yeah, number seven. So way more successful than either of the two anthology songs. Here's where I stand with this one. I think the the AI thing. I agree with you in the sense of like how it is a concern in terms of like how certainly the film industry has openly stated that they want to use it, and obviously screenwriters and actors have pushed back on that and have been successful, thank God. And I'm sure the music industry, they have already and will continue to come up with probably exploitative ways of using it. The outrage, because there was outrage when it came out that the Beatles were using a quote unquote AI single, was definitely overblown because of like the nature of how they used it. In terms of like, it's not really artificial intelligence so much as it is like a machine learning tool designed specifically to isolate vocals. The same type of thing that they did for Get Back when they were isolating individual lines of dialogue from the different cameras. They're taking that same thing and they're using it for the Now and Then demo, which the only reason they didn't record it in the 90s while George was still around was because they could not get it to a reasonable quality at that time because the cassette humming was too loud. Which is another thing that was overblown. People said that George hated the song. That's not true. George just didn't think that the song was going to be made to a quality that he felt was fair for the Beatles' name. So about the song itself, then, I suppose, if we're comparing the piano demos, this one is actually my favorite of the piano demos. But they had to trim this down a lot for this Beatles version. Because the demo is still kind of incomplete and not all of the little ideas that John is using. There's a whole like bridge section where he has a line like, I don't want to lose you. Doesn't really fit with what they're going for here. So they cut that whole section out, which made me a little bit sad because that's my favorite part of the demo, but that's okay. I think the whole point of this is like, Now and Then is meant to be a closing statement. Like I have no doubt that the whole intent of this is meant to be kind of a farewell message to the fans, at least as far as what the Beatles brand wants this song to be. I'm differentiating the Beatles brand from the individual members because obviously, yes, it's just Paul and Ringo left at this point. And Ringo, from what I understand, wasn't even that excited about doing it at first. Paul is the one who has been pushing this. He's been pushing this really ever since the anthology project ended, saying that he wants to complete this song. And everyone has said that the reason for that is because of how he feels like the song was actually written about him. Especially, and there's like the whole story about how the last time they talked on the phone, the last thing that Lennon said to McCartney was, think of me now and then, old friend, or something like that. And that always stuck with McCartney. Who knows? It's hard to tell how much of that lore is actually based in fact, but there's no doubt McCartney has been the prime mover with trying to push this, which is why I feel like I can accept this less as a corporate, like, hey, here's one more Beatles song to make money. And I feel like this comes from a genuine artistic place, and a genuine human place of like wanting to pay one last tribute to both an old friend, an old bandmate, and to just kind of close the story in a more fulfilling way than I think Real Love would have. I like Real Love, but that doesn't really, to me, it doesn't feel like a final statement. Now and Then does. Having said that, I agree with the production critiques. I don't think this song sounds very good. Um, as much, although I will say the vocal isolation job that they did on John is insane. Like it, to get a vocal that good, it's not studio quality by any means still, but to get something sounding that decent out of a shitty cassette recording, like is it's incredible how effective that was. And the thoughts about what that like what could be done with it as far as like potentially remastering old like jazz and blues recordings and stuff like that and from like the 20s and 30s, like that could be a game changer as far as reevaluating, appreciating some older music if they choose to apply it in that way. I don't know. But yeah, it's a little bit clustered. Paul and Ringo both add their vocals and like the choruses, and you can really tell because it's old Paul, it's old Ringo, really clashes with John. Um, George is barely present at all. I hear some electric guitar riffs in the second verse that I'm pretty sure are George, and I'm pretty sure that's probably all they had because I don't think they worked on it that much in the 90s. Um, but yeah, I don't mind Paul's lap steel solo. People have been critical of that one because they're like, he doesn't really play steel guitar. I know he's trying to do a George Harrison imitation, but he's not very good at it. It's whatever. It's fine. I do like his bass part. I think Paul's bass is actually great on this song. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's different. Like, and especially if you're listening to like the Blue album and you like this new version of the Blue album, which has Long and Winding Road now as the penultimate track, and then you go into Now and Then, um, or whatever order it's in. Might be I Me Mine. That's the penultimate track. But Now and Then sounds so different from everything else that it is going to be a culture shock, and there's no getting around it. And there's not going to be much reason for people to revisit this in the long run. Um, but as a Beatles fan, and as someone who like I'll be the first person to say that I'm a fanboy, and I buy into the emotional connection piece of it. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to own it. And actually, just a couple of days ago, I bought the 7-inch single on blue vinyl, which I should have brought with me, but I did not prepare because why would you do that? Yeah, I don't know. I'm partial to it. Not fantastic, but I think as a career closer, and I'm pretty confident in saying I don't think we're going to get another quote unquote official Beatles song again. I'm happy with it. I'm grateful that it exists.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think there's definitely enough evidence to suggest that this is a one-off thing in this band's case in particular. But we'll see. We'll see what music is looking like in 10, 20 years. But yeah, we
Yeah.
better wrap this thing up.
Yes. So, you have any other things that you want to say? I know we've said pretty much everything we need to, but is there any note you want to end on as far as like how you view the singles in relation to the albums? Do you actually have a preference between one or the other? Anything like that?
I'm always going to be partial to the albums just because more Beatles,
Yeah.
basically, especially 65 onwards, their consistency track to track is almost unrivaled. In terms of like a stretch of albums, it's incredible. And yeah, this was a good exercise to do though, because there was a lot of these songs that I didn't really remember, even though I'd heard them like 4 or 5 times at the very, very least. Even the B-sides, that's what I'm talking about. Most of these songs at least 10 times. So yeah, it's very interesting to go through all these and discuss them.
Beautiful. Yeah, I had a good time. I'm appreciative to everybody who has made it this long. We're 3 hours in now. You said this is going to be a podcast. We said that you needed to get some food, get some drink in you. But I think it's important. I think it's an important discussion to have. And I think it's important to have this discussion now as we kind of see what really feels like a career closure with this final single release. I think it's important to kind of view this retrospective in this context. And I I don't know. I'm curious to see what everybody's opinions are as far as your favorite Beatles singles. If you have a ranking, we didn't really do that, but if you have a ranking, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I'm also curious what you think of Now and Then specifically. Do you think that it stands up to the other anthology singles? Do you think it stands up to the other Beatles singles? Um, I'm very curious. We'll see. Maybe there'll be some. There's some optimistic people out there. But thank you all for sticking with us. Make sure to check out William Schmilliam's, Tom Williams' channel, and make sure to check out my channel too if this is your first time visiting Music Deep Dive. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care now.